9/16/11-1624 LS. It's hard to approve something when you don't know what it is.
Which one is this, Rob?
It's 6/13/2004. It's warrant number
2014.
2014. I'm getting old.
Was it to the revolving fund? Oh, okay. I see.
Oh, that series of numbers, the
Yeah.
revolving fund.
1592, 1609.
Is that what it is? It's a series of checks?
No, I don't.
And it's warrant number, I'm sorry I didn't send this to you in advance, 010-5838. You can get back to us if you want.
This is for $640, right?
Yeah.
All right.
It's just that I think we should, we in the public should know what each check
More
is
descriptive.
for. I mean, it takes so long to read through it, and then it's like, what the heck is that?
Yep. Okay, are you happy moving forward?
I'm
and
happy
just
moving
waiting
forward. I
to,
just would like,
further information at a later date. Okay. Do I have a motion on the consent calendar?
I'll move to approve the consent calendar.
I'll second with that advisor that we hear what that is. Okay, thank you.
I have to ask for a roll call.
Okay, so can we have a roll call vote, please?
Board Member Rosenbaum,
Aye.
Board Member Lowe,
Here, aye.
Board Member Black,
I need to abstain from checks number 50420034, 50421440, 504-34083, 504-34748, 504-36107, and 504-36345. Otherwise, aye.
Vice President Maris,
Aye.
President Knight,
Aye.
Could I was just going to make a comment to our student board members. I think at any time you should feel free to ask a question of clarification, as this is new to you. It was new to me when I first came to the board and did certain things. There'll be some times when we might ask you for what's called an advisory vote, where we might just want your opinion on something. But if you have any questions, you can either let us know or write it down and then ask us at another time. You should definitely feel free.
Can I add on to that, please? First of all, I'd like to formally welcome both of you, and it's a pleasure having you here. At least for me, and I believe I speak for the board, the student voice is really important. And so if you hear something that, or something gets mentioned, or something on the agenda is something that really is an issue for students, I would love it if you speak up, okay? Because we're here ultimately to serve you.
And I would add, and I know Alan wants to speak, but I think since we're on persons to address the board on matters not on the agenda, it's not on the agenda, welcome. I'll just say that also to you two. It's really, it really is important to have students sitting up here with us. And I know it is very difficult as a student to imagine that you're going to have something to contribute, but in fact, you do have something to contribute. And we do welcome your views, and especially insights into what's going on at the schools. So please feel free whenever the spirit moves. Alan.
Could the superintendent introduce our two new school board members to the public?
Good question.
Your superintendent can, but I know their first names only. I apologize.
Well, let them introduce themselves and
So
speak up.
I'm Isabel Roquois. I'm a senior. I'm Michael Singer. I'm a junior.
Great.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome.
And do speak up.
And if I may, I know that's the board's addressing, but I really want to formally welcome both of you also on behalf of the school district to having your voice be heard. The student board member voice is a very important voice because everything that we do is all about our students. And so your voices are important because you represent our most precious constituents, and that is the students of Albany Unified School District. So welcome.
And could I just ask for a question of clarification, maybe from the two of you? So, are your members of the leadership committee or the leadership group at the
Is it a
Albany?
class this year?
We
or is
class
it a
this
club?
year?
Speak into them.
It's an advisory class this year, so a little of each. Meetings within school hours.
Who's your advisor this year?
Ms. Hudson,
Wonderful. So just to clarify, then, you would regularly meet with the officers of the ASB as well as the officers of the classes, right? Okay, I just wanted to clarify so I would know.
Thanks for that clarification. I think it really helps the audience. Good.
Okay, thank you.
And the reason we talk into the mics is because we're actually going out over the web and over the local station, and we're being videotaped, which the public needs to know as well. Videotape, that's an old thing, right?
It's probably more digital than that, but
We're being digitized.
the result is the same.
And so on the city website and on the district website, you can actually go back and look at the video or the digitized photos in motion.
All right. Is there anyone here to address the board on anything that's not on the agenda tonight? This would be the time to come on up. Introduce yourself. Not tonight. All right, then. We'll move on to our staff report this evening. We have a staff report on the summer school.
Thank you. I actually would like to turn this portion of the staff report over to our Director of Curriculum Instruction, Mr. Peter Parenti, who is going to introduce our summer school principal.
So I am Director Parenti, Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and I oversaw the summer school program at the high school as well as the extended year program. And I am passing it along again now to Jason Matlin. We selected him as our principal for the summer school program. He came on board around January of 2014 and planned very carefully with the high school staff and with the special education department staff and with the facility and maintenance staff, because there was such a large component to facility and maintenance in this year's program. So I introduce you to Jason Matlin. He's got a summary report for the board.
Thank you. So this past June and July, Albany held a successful summer school, and that summer school was made up of two different programs, the Credit Recovery Program and the Extended School Year Program. In the Credit Recovery Program, Albany offered 4 different classes, and the students were selected for those classes based on low academic performance of either earning no credit in classes before or up to a D. I worked with the counselors to recruit the students, to enroll the students, and then to form the class rosters. And 4 classes were offered. Teachers held 3-hour classes for 19 days, and the breakdown is up on the slide behind me. There was one section of English 1-2 taught in the morning by Sarah Leslie Hayes. And 25 students were enrolled, 21 earned credit. There were 2 sections of English 2-3 taught by Justin Ross. 26 students enrolled in the morning section and 24 earned credit. There were 20 students enrolled in the afternoon section, 17 earned credit. Then finally, there was a U.S. World History class taught in the afternoon by Emily Wallen, and there were 24 students enrolled, 17 earned credit. And the totals there is 95 student seats were filled. 79 of those student seats earned credit, getting us to an 83% credit recovery rate.
When you say earn credit, could you define that, please?
So they had a D or higher. Yeah.
Do we know percentages that got grades above a D?
I don't have that exact data for you. I could get that for you, though.
Thank you.
Sure. In addition to these classes, we also offered credit recovery classes online through Aventa. And that was in coordination with the Flex program at the high school. There were 15 courses that were taken by 12 different students, and eight of those courses were passed, getting us to a 53% passing rate.
Right. Can you comment on that a little bit? That's a pretty low passing rate compared to the kids who are actually sitting in class. So can you explain why, what the factors were that went into that, and if you have any ideas about improving that for next time?
So my role was, when I took over in summer school, I was kind of just managing what had already been pre-established. These students were enrolled before I took over. So I monitored their progress. Every week there was a progress report that was sent. I'd also log in and check to see whether they were logging in or not and how they were doing. I sent emails. I offered office hours, computer lab hours. I think it was a matter of students not necessarily logging in and getting online.
Do we have a criteria for, is there a separate criteria for the students who go into the event program?
For the summer school portion of it, not necessarily. It's typically students who need to recover credits. And as I think we all know, online learning is not for everyone, and it takes a certain kind of student who has a lot of motivation and a lot of structure in their world to do that. There were several students in Aventa this summer who were McGregor students that I'm familiar with. At least one of those students I took over from Jason when he discontinued, his assignment ended, and I continued to monitor the students on Aventa, and at least one of those students, whom I know well from McGregor, she would just respond saying, "I'm sorry, I haven't done my work yet." And she's a very capable student, she just chose not to use that option to regain her credits. So the students for Aventa typically come through the counselors at the high school and at McGregor, and we give them at least one chance to recover credits in this way. It works for some and not for others.
I've seen a number of emails that have gone back and forth and questions about this, and I'm just brainstorming now. Would it make sense to encourage students to take the in-class classes rather than Aventa, at least to
Yes.
counsel the ones that we think
Yes,
would be more successful with that kind of structure?
yes. And then some students aren't successful in either, so. And then we had one student this summer, who was not successful in the class, but was able to complete it online, so.
So it's individualized instruction.
And that
Right.
particular student had failed a previous Aventa class, so I don't know if he just got motivated over the summer, and so it's a really individual, decision, and I don't know, I know the counselors and staff work very carefully to try to identify kids who are going to be successful in Aventa, but we can always try to improve the process.
And sometimes a student tries the summer school class and doesn't work. I worked with a student when I first came on board, was not doing well in the classroom setting, and we said, let's try the online portion, and he wasn't able to be as successful as I had hoped.
We try what we can.
Alan?
In the introductory paragraphs, you talk about disabled students, some moderate to severely disabled.
So that was in the second part of summer school, the
Right.
extended year program.
Mm-hmm.
So I just talked about credit recovery. An extended year program was for students who were from ages 5 to 22,
Right.
severe to moderate to severe disabilities, and there were 4 different classes that were offered. One was at the Albany Children's Center. That was the elementary preschool class that was taught by Chloe Mock, and there were 11 students enrolled, 1 teacher and 5 paras. Then the elementary class was taught by Martha Schneider at Albany High School. There were 15 students enrolled, 2 total teachers. She had Catherine Ledbetter assisting her, as well as 5 paras. The middle school class was taught by Carla Swan at Albany High School, and there were 8 students enrolled, 1 teacher and 2 paras. And then the high school and transition class was taught by Richard Usman, and there were 13 students, led by 1 teacher and 6 paras. And if you total that all up, that's 47 students, 23
Paras.
staff members, very close to a 2-to-1 ratio.
Yeah, that's good.
And there were also
How is their success measured?
they're working towards achieving their individual academic,
Right, their
behavioral,
EPs.
language, all their goals, and being involved not just in the administrative role, but stepping into the classroom and helping them out whenever they could. It was inspiring to watch all these
Good.
staff members and all the students really work together. It was a pretty great great part of the summer school.
Good, thank you.
There was also, just in addition to that, 28 students were offered occupational therapy by Sinna Hunter and David Beniski, and then 39 students were offered speech by Carol Aldape. And in my opinion, I think the summer school worked out so well because of so much teamwork and collaboration from the staff at the high school and the ACC welcoming us in, custodians, facilities working to put it all together. Nick Berger, the previous principal, offering me the template of what he'd used in years past and helping me out. Clell Hoffman providing lunch for all the kids. And then when I needed administrative support, Diane Marie helping me with the extended year program, and then Peter and Marcia. So it was my pleasure to do it.
Just a comment, I really appreciate you working with, trying to get the students who are having difficulty achieving academic success, but keep working with them, and some of them will surprise you. They hit their timing or whatever it is they need, and they move on. McGregor has a lot of great stories like that.
I really enjoyed this experience.
Good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Great, thanks.
Thank
Very
you.
important
Thank
stuff.
you.
Can
Thank
I make one suggestion for, I mean, I think this is great, and it occurred to me now, not in advance, but we see these numbers every year, but I don't remember from year to year what last year's numbers were like, and I'm wondering if anyone remembers whether the pass rate was similar last year, or higher or lower, or if maybe we should have these reports in a context of previous years just to get a sense of if there are any trends. I mean, the numbers are very small, so it may be that we can't make anything of it, but I'm just curious.
We can actually, we can do it a couple of ways. One, if you would like this information, if whatever we can gather, I can ask Peter to put it in a Friday update. But also, when we do our summer school report next year, we'll make a note that it would be good to add on to the presentation a comparison or just kind of updated numbers, and we can probably track it. As the years go by, we'll be able to add a year and add a year and add a year. But at least for some immediate information, we can provide it to the board in a Friday update.
I think that's a good idea, because then we can start to get a better understanding of how to better serve students, particularly with the online options.
And I'd like to thank you for the presentation, very clear. And I think, you know, the positive output talks really well to our teaching and support staff. I mean, that's you know, the in-class, that's a very decent percentage.
I think I agree. Please pass on our thanks to the staff members as well.
Thank you very much.
From the district administration, if we could just communicate, enormous thanks to Jason Matlin. I just want to reiterate, summer school is not a summer school assignment when you're a summer school administrator. As a former summer school administrator for multiple years in a previous district, I know it begins in January, and Jason probably put more hours in between January and May than he did every day that he was there at summer school. You're hiring and recruiting staff, in some cases almost begging staff, please stay with us during the summer when I know you'd like to take a break. We know that our students are much more connected and well supported by their in-district teachers. And so the first place from January through June is networking with our in-home teachers. And Jason was able to secure out of 4 classes, 3 of them are covered by our own in-house teachers. He negotiated facilities. And as you know, as the board working with facilities since January, there were a lot of unknowns. Demolition at the middle school drove us to choose the high school, but then remodeling at the high school, and those plans were done later, and Jason mediated that really well. He worked with the counselors and the AHS administrators while he's working full-time at Albany Middle. So he's got his responsibilities for safe school ambassadors and climate programs at the middle school, 2 classes after lunch, and then running to the high school to recruit students and inspire them to stick for the summer school and record their credits. And finally, of course, every day that I was there, and I know every day that he was there, I saw Jason in the classrooms, supporting teachers, talking with them, being out there in the hallway during passing times, and now closing the loop by giving you this report. Your statistics and your success rates are product of your hard work. Your connection in the classrooms with teachers and kids made a difference, and we have an extremely high pass rate because of that. I think comparing from previous years is a great idea. Board President, you mentioned something. These are small numbers. These are small groups of students. And our federal and state cultures have asked us to try to do comparisons over time, but these are sensitive small groups with wide ranges of needs and variables that we can't control. So be careful to control, like, well, today we got 26 to pass, and last year we got 24 to pass, and the year before we got 30. Can't we get 31? That could be really a challenge. Different teachers, different kids, different content areas. But again, that plus supporting the transition programs, which are a completely different type of program. The culture is supportive, IEPs are in place, and he worked through all of them.
Yeah.
So thank you to Mr. Matlin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I certainly don't want to create extra work that will give us no information that's useful. So it may well be that those numbers are really too unreliable to do anything with, in which case presenting them might just mislead people.
We could build them in a Friday update, because I think
Yeah.
we've got the data points from at least the last 2 years from our summer school reports and Mr. Berger. And so we could put the data point together, but I'll probably frame it with that cautionary tale about driving program success based on a long-term trend.
Right.
It's good for school boards and for the public to understand the depth of variables that go into that, so, and to know to take those numbers with a grain of salt.
All right.
Excuse me, I have a confession to make.
Uh-oh.
I failed to list the student board member report on the agenda because we did not have a student board member report for so long when I prepared this agenda, and no one caught it, probably because that
I was going to
reason.
ask.
I apologize, and I'm hoping that you can amend the agenda to allow them to provide the report they prepared.
I move to amend the agenda immediately.
I second. It's perfectly understandable.
That supports all the statements we've made so far tonight about them, so go for it.
You guys are out.
Well, let's make it a staff report, because that's where we are now.
It practically
So
is, right?
As
Yeah.
a second staff report, let's just
Thank
add
you,
that.
Jackie.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
let's
we
slot
have
that
a
in.
Student report.
Thanks very much.
Hey. Thank you. So there's been a lot of activity over the summer and the beginning of the school year as pertains to the student body. Over the summer, there was a lot of community events that happened that included clubs and extracurriculars, as well as in-class activities. The Vocal and Performing Arts Department paired with 2 other schools to go travel to Spain with the band, with a select group of students, and they went to Barcelona and several other cities, and it was a very powerful experience for many of them, I've heard.
Another activity that took place over the summer was the Build On Club raised the money to build a school in Nicaragua. Over the course of the school year, they raised over $40,000 and sent 11 members of the club to Nicaragua to help break ground on that school, and another member to Haiti with another school's chapter.
Leadership decided to make efforts to building progress within our program and trying to develop a stronger student council. A small group of students were sent to the California Association of Student Councils, which met at St. Mary's this year, and it was a 3-day intensive. And those students are now bringing a lot of what they learned into classes and meetings and trying to build a stronger program so we can have a more successful leadership for the students this year.
And then coming into the first 2 weeks of school that have just passed, the first event was the first day of school, which happened on Tuesday, the 26th of August, and it was uneventful. It went just as planned.
Choir and the general vocal music department planned several community and learning activities over this past weekend, and trying to develop a stronger visual and performing arts department there.
Additionally, the leadership group had what we called a leadership retreat, which was when the students who attended the CASC camp taught the other leadership students about what they learned. And leadership at that event made the decision to have our prom on May 30th of the next year at Treasure Island. And the volleyball, cross-country, football, and tennis teams, as well as the women's golf team, started their seasons.
a lot of returning clubs have renewed their charters recently. We're expecting returns of the theater clubs, Build On, Key Club, and a whole host of others, which are too numerous to name right now, but it's great to see that we haven't lost a lot of those important traditional clubs that we've had at the school for a very long time.
And additionally, a bunch of new clubs will be joining the roster this year. There are, like Michael said, far too many to mention, but we'll be seeing that taking place in the next few months as those clubs get organized and start their activities. And our final section are the events that will be coming up in the near future. On October 25th, there will be a haunted house on Albany High School's campus, hosted by Lawrence Berkeley Hall of Science. It has a focus on STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, to teach young children about those fields. And it will be adapted later in the night for the older children to come.
Leadership is planning on having several class fundraisers to help build more funds for the coming years. One of the ideas that was presented and has come closest to actually becoming a stable event is bowling fundraisers for each of the individual classes, similar to grad night, but on a smaller scale, to encourage larger funds for classes so that homecoming budgets and future prom budgets are accessible and have enough to create the events we want to be able to make.
And next Wednesday will be Club Rush on the 17th, which is an event for the clubs that are interested to have tables and posters and items to give out to students to encourage them to join their clubs.
And in addition to Club Rush, there's more new leadership events that are trying to incorporate clubs as a stronger force in the Albany community. There's going to be a Council of Presidents that is going to meet most likely once every month during advisory and communicate with leadership and other advisors in order to build stronger clubs for the future and keep interest going.
And the leadership group has recently voted on a series of monthly spirit days to have at Albany High School to increase school unity and camaraderie among the students. And finally, homecoming, which is a yearly event for all of the classes to engage in friendly competition, will take place on the week of October 20th, and leadership will facilitate all of those activities.
Thank you very much. Questions from the board, Alan?
Yeah, what an extensive list of activities. You're so busy. I just want to add one, and that's the Albany Triathlon, which PAWS is sponsoring, promoting Albany High sports. It's on the 27th, a Saturday. It starts at 8 o'clock, goes till noon. It raises funds for sports at Albany High School, and the connection is albanytri.com.
Thank you.
And in the past,
Volunteers.
yes, we've been fortunate enough to have, many members of the high school community help us out, including the leadership. So Alan or others may be approaching the leadership to ask for some volunteers to help out on that day, or you can participate in the triathlon if you'd like.
Yeah, Zeke Lopez, your athletic director, said he would try to contact the different groups, including leadership.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
That was a wonderful report. Thank you. I'm looking
Thank you.
forward to a lot of the events. I just wanted to ask some of the other leadership, because I have a senior, so I know some of the other kids. They had told me about some of the training that you've been through as well. And were you part of the group that got taught by the people that attended, or did either of you go to St. Mary's, or?
Neither of us attended the retreat, but we were. Michael, unfortunately, was not able to make it to the training session, but I was there. So some leadership students were able to be trained by the students who went to this camp.
So Isabel, could I ask you, is there one thing, I'm always trying to learn how to be a more effective leader and to work well in meetings, and always trying to learn something from everyone. So was there one thing that stuck out in your mind from the training that you got that seemed to be valuable for you?
One thing that stuck out due to the unique nature of it was we worked on sitting in circles that were balanced in energy, meaning that no students were sitting on ledges or slouching down too much. So we were on the same plane, and that included all sitting in the same manner so that we felt unified, so that we could discuss issues as a group and not as individuals.
So that's very interesting. So sort of the language of the body language and how it might affect interactions in a discussion. That's great.
And additionally, we were introduced to a way to approach decision-making, which the ASB Vice President, Jane, laid out for us. And it was kind of a complicated chart, but we started by, we used it for the haunted house planning. So it started with listing our ideal goals and then working into more realistic, and finally ending with our tasks of what we had to do to get those things done to realize our ideal goal.
Thank you. That's very interesting. It's always good to figure out people's processes and what works.
I want to thank you for a very robust report. It's very impressive. I'm wondering if this board, including our 2 student board members, would be interested in having the group that went to Nepal, is it to Nicaragua?
Nicaragua, yes.
Have them maybe come and do a presentation to the board on the progress of that. I happened to run into the team that one summer when I was in San Francisco and they were raising some funds. And so, I don't know if the board would be interested in having a presentation. We can always ask.
Yes, absolutely.
We agree with that.
It's our
I think the
slideshow.
I think the group that did the Nepal school last year
They came, they gave us a
They gave a
slideshow.
great presentation. Yeah.
I can suggest that at the next build-on meeting next Tuesday. I'm in the club, so I will talk to the presidents about that.
And if they're really good at building schools, we have a couple here.
Yeah. If you can let me know, then we can agendize that. I also appreciate that you give a well-balanced report in terms of the academics as well as the clubs and the sports. And I really want to commend our football team these last 2 games who beat the Washington and Mission San Jose from Fremont. I've sent my condolences to both of those principals who happen to be friends of mine and said, I'm really sorry that Albany beat you. Go Cougars. And we also have an outstanding girls volleyball team. I had a chance to watch that game also. So thank you for giving a nice, well-rounded report for students.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. So that brings us back to the regular agenda with our first review and discussion item, which is our budget update, our somewhat heart-stopping budget update.
Let's go back to the students.
Okay.
Yeah,
Madam Superintendent, Board President Knight, members of the board. My name is Alan Gard. I'm the CBO for the Albany Unified School District. And so tonight's presentation is designed to be the first of several meetings where this is going to lay some foundational data and information to help prepare for the Budget Priorities Workshop that's scheduled for September 23rd. And so please feel free to ask any questions along the way while we go through this presentation. So some key facts. 3/4 of our funding is coming from the state, which is not good news when you see that California is ranked far below the national average. Over the past 40 years, California has tried to provide equitable funding across the state, and the new local control funding formula is their latest attempt to do that. And so I just want to emphasize that their goal is to provide equitable and not equal funding across the state, and you'll see why in the coming slides. So one of the key items in how the state funds education is through a constitutional guarantee, which is called Proposition 98. The minimum guarantee with Proposition 98 is that it's a minimum level to fund kindergarten or transitional kindergarten through community college. And as long as California provides the level of funding in total for all of those programs combined, then they essentially meet that Prop 98 guarantee. And so that means if the state decides to increase funding for community colleges or increase funding for special education and decrease funding for child nutrition, they have the full power to do that. And that provides some concern because a large funding is from the local control funding formula, and that has a very loose guarantee for that specific program, which we'll talk about in a few slides.
Alan, for the last several years during the Great Recession, I don't believe the state was even meeting that Proposition 98 minimum.
Correct.
Will they ever pay that money back?
No, they won't. So the state,
Surprise, surprise.
through the legislature, has the ability to amend the Proposition 98 guarantee. And by doing so, they're able to, quote unquote, meet the guarantee that year. However, based on how it's normally calculated, they would not meet the guarantee over the past few years.
I believe they've never met the guarantee. Is that right?
That's something I would have to research and get back to. I know.
I think so.
Could you explain a little bit about the deferral break buy down? I think that's kind of what Paul was talking about as well. The deferred payments that stacked up and amounted to about $5 million for the Albany School District. How is that a component of spending?
For the state, they account for funds through cash. And so with the deferral, a deferral buy down is an amount owed to school districts based on prior year amounts. And so it's basically money that is given to us this year that they should have given us last year.
Or 5 years ago even.
But they can still count it against this year's minimum.
Correct.
Okay.
And so for their minimum guarantee, they could say that they're providing an increase in funding to education, but for our method of accounting, it's not providing any increase because it's just cash that they're actually giving us now that they should have given us previously.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to see data on how many children of our legislators are in public schools.
You're a cynic, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
So another key aspect of how the state funds education recently is through Proposition 30, which is a brand new proposition that was passed in November 2012. So when the governor and the media was trying to get this proposition approved in November, they were claiming how it was going to save education, it was going to provide a huge influx of funding. However, what they didn't really specify was that they've already incorporated that influx in funding when they adopted their budget in June. And so what the passage of Prop 30 meant was that it only avoided a large amount of cuts in the middle of the year for education, and it didn't provide a large increase like they were stating. So a concern that I have for Proposition 30 is that these are temporary taxes. They're temporary taxes for both sales tax and income tax. And the state is reluctant to provide data on what their plan is to fund education once those temporary taxes go away. They like to say that, well, the economy is going to be better and we'll have money, but just don't worry about it. Because we're talking about $7 billion a year for education, that is something that districts need to be aware of and concerned with, is what their plan is in the out years. So just some facts on the local control funding formula. So each school district is going to be affected differently by this formula. And this is because the state trying to provide equitable funding. And they do that with the number of English learners and low-income students and foster youth students that a school district has.
By a percentage of the population.
Correct. And we'll go over more detail of that in a couple of slides. But I just wanted to point out here that districts this coming year are going to receive either a 0% increase, so a $0 amount increase, or as much as 18% increase in funding from the state. For Albany Unified specifically, we're receiving about 10% in increase in LCFF dollars, local control funding dollars, but then in the out years it'll go down to more like 4 or 5%.
But it's still additional.
It's misleading that it's additional money, and I'll go over why. So another component of the local control funding formula is there's a allocation specific to grades K through 3 for class sizes of 24 to 1. However, there is an exception to this, and this is because Governor Brown, he is a lawyer, and he knows how sensitive class sizes are for collective bargaining agreements, and so he has embedded in the local control funding formula a waiver for this required 24 to 1 ratio. Another component is a fixed allocation that was initially to provide funding for grades 9 through 12 career tech education. And so I just want to point out that it was initially geared towards that, but once LCFF was finalized, the funding could be used for any educational purpose.
So that was a change then?
It was a change from when they proposed the formula to when they actually adopted the formula last year.
Okay.
But the board has decided or has given direction to put this money in Fund 17, which is a special reserve for its initial purpose of career tech education. So this is an aggregate view of how the local control funding formula works. So every school district across the state is receiving the base grant amounts per student. What's different is the percent of enrollment eligible. So for Albany, it's 34%. So that's 34% of our students are eligible or are either English learners, foster youth, or low income. And so because of that, we receive an additional supplemental grant. And so those are targeted funds for targeted students.
But isn't there a cutoff? If you're much higher than 34%, you're going to get a larger portion of the LCFF funds?
Correct. So the state designed LCFF to provide more funding for the school districts that have a large concentration of low-income foster youth English learners. And so because we have 34% and not the 55% cutoff, we're not receiving any concentration grants, which Oakland, West Contra Costas are receiving. So the media and the state are championing that they're mentioning the target amounts, which are $9,300 for high school students. So they're saying that that's how much they're funding education with LCFF. However, in reality, because the state didn't have enough funds to fully fund LCFF, we have to phase in this process, which means we're getting in total less than $7,000 per student this year.
But the goal is to eventually, over the years, get those funds that we're seeing.
Correct. So the state has promised to meet this goal and fully fund LCFF by 2021. However, the Legislative Analyst's Office, which is a nonpartisan advisor to the state, they mentioned how they don't see how meeting this goal is possible, even with rosy projections.
And Alan, it's my understanding also that this 2021 target date is only to get us back to the 2007-8 funding, not what we would have been funded from 2007-8 to 2021, or even 2015-16.
So this bottom line number is the number K through 12?
Correct.
So all the variations don't mean anything really?
Correct. And I'll explain why there's a lump sum number during the phased-in years. So during the phased-in years, we basically have to work with two sets of numbers, which is a target amount and then the actual amount of money that we're receiving. So if you look at the very first line where it says grades K3 and then it has the ADA and then the base grant. So to calculate the target amount, we just take the average daily attendance of all TK through third graders and multiply that by the base grant that we're receiving. And then we also multiply it by the K3 add-on.
And what's the add on the GR span?
Oh, it's short for grade span. So it's a grade span add-on, which is the additional money for the 24-to-1 ratios.
Even in high school?
For the high school, that grade span add-on was the career tech education.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that looks right. Okay.
And so we add up each amount to get the target amount of $9,400,000. And we do that for each grade span to get a total of $31 million. So that's the target amount for 2020-21. But because the state doesn't have enough funding to fully implement LCFF, they have to phase it in. So we go to the bottom box, the summary of funding. So we take the target amount of $31 million and compare it to a floor amount. So the floor amount for LCFF is essentially 2012-13 funding plus some growth. So the state is not required to give us anything other than the floor amount every year. So if there is a dip in a recession, the state can easily bring us back down to 12-13 and they don't have to make any constitutional amendments or things like that they've had to do in the past. So when they compare the target amount and the floor amount, there's this gap. And so for 2013-14, the gap was about $9 million or $8.5 million. And that $8.5 million gap is multiplied by how much the state can phase into LCFF. So for us was an additional $1 million last year. And so so you add the floor amount to the actual gap funding that the state can provide, and that gives us the amount that we're actually going to receive.
Which is about $8 million short of the target.
Correct.
They're not funding the gap.
Right.
So, aren't we at least receiving more money from the state and LCFF? Well, if you just look at actual dollar amounts, yes, we are. However, when you compare it to the old funding method, which was the revenue limit method, we're actually doing worse than if we stayed under that method. Now, if you just compare it to the purchasing power of the school district compared to last year, we're not even able to maintain that even with the additional funding that we're receiving. And one of those reasons is because the state, which I'll talk about in a few slides, the state has mandated that the school districts take over a large burden of the retirement systems, and so they're requiring over the years that there's a larger increase towards funding the PERS and STIRS retirements. Another reason for why we're not maintaining the purchasing power as last year is our rise in health and welfare. So over the years, the average growth for health and welfare has been about 10%, and I'm projecting about 7% growth in the out years because it's kind of slowed down a little bit, but it's still, there's still been large increases. We're also not maintaining the same purchasing power as last year because of annual salary raises due to the step and column placements of how school districts staff.
Alan, sorry, can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
Does the step and column, in theory, eventually people, as people retire and new teachers are hired, they enter in a different column, a different step. Doesn't it balance out, or are we seeing a lot of, retention of staff so that we have a kind of rising cost for step and column?
It varies. So generally speaking, a younger employee is more typical to have either like a family, and so that cost for that employee would be much greater than a veteran employee that may only have benefits of themselves.
Because of the health and welfare
Because of the health and
difference
welfare
cost. Okay.
But then just looking at the salary placements, because we have, so STEP is essentially the number of years that an employee has been with a district, and then column is the number of units and degrees that an employee has. So, being a high-performing district, we are always trying to recruit the best and brightest, and so they don't always start off at the very beginning of a salary schedule.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We do actually attract some teachers who leave other districts and come to us with years of experience.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Which is great.
So one of the retirements that the state has mandated the district to pay is CalPERS, which is the California Public Employee Retirement System. So last year, the state had school districts pay or make a contribution of about 11.44% of a employee's salary. Because there's such a large unfunded liability in CalPERS, the state has required that school districts phase in to go up to 20% in 2021. And so while there are increases in funding for Albany, there's also mandated increased expenses. And so you can see that this increase is almost double. Now for CalSTRS, which is the California State Teachers Retirement System, there's also another large unfunded liability. And so the way the state has addressed this is, again, by having the school districts pay for it. So they have started to phase in increasing the employee and the state rates. However, you can see on the chart that it's more than double that the state is requiring school districts to pay. So we're going from 8.25%, which has which hasn't changed since 1986, to 19.1% in 2020-21.
So in that chart, the state is basically doubling their contribution, but it's significantly smaller.
Correct.
And employees are increasing slightly, but not nearly double.
Another way to look at the increase in STRS contributions is by the percent of the budget that it's going to consume. So in 2013-14, just looking at the CalSTRS contributions, it took up close to 4%. And by 2021, it'll take up 8.5% of the budget. Looking at PERS, it's currently taking up 1.5% of the budget, and by 2021, it'll take up 2.3%. And so here's an interesting chart. So 2012-13 is the latest official data, and comparing how much health and welfare is consuming the entire budget as a percentage across the county. Albany Unified is at the top. And it's also much higher than the California state average.
The horizontal, it's not really a scale on that graph. It's just, you just stretched out the different points from the
Correct.
table above.
So this is, the different points are each school district.
And you just laid them out in order of.
But it gives you a pretty clear sense of how far we are above the average. And I would say the schools tend to clump. There are quite a few below 4% or so, or 5% compared to the small number above it.
We also need to bear in mind that some of these school districts, their health and welfare benefits are folded into their salary schedule, and they get pre-tax dollars. Some school districts have a salary and they add the benefits on top of that. So it just bears mentioning that not every single district does it the same way as another district.
Which really, and I've thought about that makes this really not fair, because we're comparing apples and oranges. For example, I mean, we've done, some of our administrators have that built into their salaries. So we say that, it's not the same cost. There's no cost. But actually there is. Right. So it'd be hard to calculate, because we give somebody, whatever number of thousands of dollars a year, and then they buy their benefits out of that. So their salaries are higher. So there's a cost involved there as well. Still apples and oranges.
And there are some districts that have a cap on their benefits, so it's, I just want to make sure that whenever you look at a piece of data, there's so many ways to look at it, so to be fair, that there are many variables that go into each of these school districts.
I mean, if there was a column that had average salary, help us understand this. I don't know. Let's look at Hayward, for example. Employees' expense per ADA is $20.36. Somebody's paying for the benefits somehow.
Yeah, I wonder if there is any way to disentangle this. I mean, it might be a bit of a project to look at
Very difficult.
contracts and see what's in there, but to somehow tease out what the actual costs for health and welfare are from the district versus what goes to salary. I suppose it'll vary from person to person whenever it's in the cap. Whenever it's in their salary, they can do what they want.
As someone who has done this study, it is very difficult. It took me over a year, because there are different classifications, especially if you do this on the classified side, you can. But it took me about a year, and then you have to remember that each time a school district bargains, and so when you get that, it takes you a year to do the data, and then if something changes and a raise is given or benefits are changed, then you have to start all over again, because then, and some districts may not report out for a year, so it's not an exact science.
We've actually, the board in the past has tried to do that, calculating, for example, what superintendent's salary should be. And it's really difficult, so it's almost an impossible task, because some costs are hidden, some charts don't divulge certain data.
But this kind of gives you an idea of some trends.
Right.
It gives you sort of a ballpark look at it.
Did you wish to speak?
Yeah. Typically, health and welfare, or whatever the total expense is for an employee over and above their salary, is somewhere around $20,000 or $30,000 a year, depending on their situation. If Hayward is basically paying nothing, are their teachers and staff getting $20,000 or $30,000 a year more?
Question.
Right, that would be something that we would need to look into.
I don't think so. I've looked at salaries in the past, and there's not that wide a discrepancy between,
Because in general, for example, the board has had discussions about how, of course, it's fundamental that we want to attract the best and brightest teachers.
Right.
That's fundamental to good schools. So we want to be, above the median in terms of compensation, but it's total compensation then. So, and then it sometimes is hard to make a comparison to see if we are, because of the factors that you've addressed.
I think if you're looking at total compensation, and I'm speaking in a very global sense, you could possibly look at what the salaries are, and then you would have to tease out which districts have the benefits incorporated in the salary schedule. So if you have, I'm making this up, let's say you have 20 districts in Alameda County, or even in adjacent counties, and you say 5 of these have salaries and then benefits on top of that, you would have to calculate in the benefits and have a total compensation number, and then look for the districts that have the benefits built into the salary schedule. That one's a little bit easier because it's a fixed amount. You can say this is what the salary is. So you have to do a little bit of calculating to look at total compensation, but you're in the right range. You're on the right track in terms of when you look at comparisons. You do want to look at total compensation.
So another view of how health and welfare rates have fared over time. So about 10 years ago, full family coverage cost $12,243, and it took up 8% of our budget. But when looking at last year, full family cost $28,000 and took up 13% of our budget. Just looking at previous trends, assuming a 7% increase in health and welfare rates, the growth would mean that health and welfare would take up close to 18% of our budget by 2021.
I didn't ask you this ahead of time, so I feel it's not fair. You don't have to address it, but we have had this conversation before about how we thought that there might be a flattening out because of the Affordable Care Act. And I did hear you mention that you are, even though you're very wisely being conservative, you're slowing down the percentage of growth at 7%. But are you basing that on any studies, projections?
So when looking at the past 10 years, it's been an average of a 10% increase each year. However, when looking at just the past 3 to 4 years, it's been closer to the 7% increase. So being financially conservative, I'm still using that 7% increase in the out years. However, as we progress, as more data becomes available, then I'll refine those projections.
Okay, that makes sense.
Do you mind if I ask a question? My understanding also is that if there's a certain percent that goes over, and I'm sorry I'm using layman's terms, if there's a certain percent that we go over in terms of paying for health and welfare benefits, are we subject to the Cadillac tax? Is that still something that's in effect? Can you explain that just a little bit?
Sure. So one of the things with the Affordable Care Act is what's called a Cadillac tax. So the federal government wants everybody to have health and welfare benefits. However, they also don't want a large premium version of health coverage being very expensive. So they label it a Cadillac tax because it's a premium brand. A Cadillac tax would be charged to school districts that have a very premium health and welfare coverage, and it would be a percent of that premium that would be charged for each employee of the district that the school district would pay.
Is it the district that's taxed or the employee?
It would be the district that's taxed because the district is the one that's providing the health and welfare coverage.
Is that a state tax?
No, it would be a federal tax.
Okay.
So we're going to watch this very carefully. We're going to kind of monitor that.
Correct. Because it is something that I believe it's expected to be phased in 2018. However, they have been postponing various dates, and so we are keeping track of it. So one of the things that I want to point out on this slide is just comparing the annual revenue growth over 2013-14 with the annual expenditure growth. And the annual expenditure growth is encompassing all the things that I've mentioned previously, which are the mandated increase in retirement contributions, health and welfare, and the salary raises over step and column placements. And so as you can see, if Measure LL fails, which is the parcel tax that is on the ballot for November, if it fails, you can see the red bar, which is the expenditure growth, is much higher than the green bar, which is the revenue growth. However, if Measure LL passes in November, the expenditure growth is still higher than the revenue growth. So what that means is the deficit spending that we're currently doing is not going to get better over time. Some districts, because they benefit from LCFF and will receive more money over time, they can kind of wait out, just waiting for more money from the state. However, with our district specifically, because the revenues are not going to increase, because the revenue growth is not higher than the expenditure growth over time, the deficit spending would only increase. So here's a multi-year projection of the Albany Unified School District if Measure LL fails. And this is something that we have to assume just to be conservative, and the Alameda County Office of Education would not allow us to assume a parcel tax passing. So we have to assume that Measure LL fails. But once November occurs, we'll know whether to include that revenue or not. So currently, if we're assuming Measure LL fails, you can see in the out years the amount of deficit spending that we're doing. So in the current year, deficit spending is about $1.4 million. And so that is eating up our reserves. Measure LL would be added in 2015-16. And that would help the deficit spending. But if we just take a look, if we just add one more year to this slide, you can see that if Measure LL fails and there's no changes to our budget, we would be bankrupt by 2017-18.
You have a great way of drawing a lousy picture. Very clear.
Thank you. So this is a slide of if Measure LL passes. So if Measure LL passes, things are better. However, it doesn't wipe out our deficit spending. And so you can see over the years we're averaging about $1 million in deficit spending. And what deficit spending means is that it's wiping out our reserve. And so even if Measure L passes and we add a year, we're still deficit spending by about $1 million, and our reserves dwindle to about $2 million at the end of 2017-18.
Which is about 3%?
The 3% is about $1.3 million that year, and so it's about 5%.
Pat, go ahead.
So I just wanted to clarify for the public, when you look down at the bottom of that table, all right, the second line from the bottom is the Fund 17, right? And so you see that Mr. Gard adds that into the total reserve, but that he clarified before that the board gave direction to put those funds into a special reserve account. And I would just like to clarify why we decided to do that, if I could remember every detail, so I need the board to help me. Okay, so as I remember, we made that decision because it was our understanding that the funding for for curriculum, career and technology courses and courses that are offered at the high school they used to be funded under separate designated funding, but under LCFF, that is going away. So we had to make a decision if we wanted to keep those courses. For example, the Venture Academy and also our ROP classes, right? Our digital photography, many classes that many students take at the high school, we had to save that money ourselves. Now, the rest of the board, does that sound like what?
Yes, the Regional Occupational Program, which is the ROP that paid for, I think at high school, 13 sections, is gone. It doesn't exist any longer. So we needed to figure out a way to maintain that program since the funds are no longer coming from an outside source. Cost account. You're accurate, yes.
I also wanted to, before you move to the next slide, ask, so it's my understanding that all of the projections here are based on the state's projections for LCFF funding through 2017. The one that the LAO said is not likely to actually come true.
That is correct.
So this, with Measure LL passing, is the best possible picture and is probably not all going to happen.
This is the most optimistic version at the time.
And then the other thing that I think we should keep in mind about this is that even though we're still down at about a 5% reserve in 17-18, 3% is the minimum legal requirement, 6% is the minimum recommended requirement for a reserve, especially for a district of this size, because $2 million is what, 3 weeks of payroll or something?
Correct.
It's gone in a heartbeat if anything happens to our funding stream, if there's a set of deferrals. I know that we were using almost our entire 15% reserve every month during the height of the deferrals a couple of years ago just to cover payroll. We would not have been able to pay teachers each month if we hadn't had that in the bank. So I just think that's something we need to keep in mind.
Definitely.
Good point. Could you explain the declining reserve for restricted funds? It goes from 1 million to eventually 0 in 17-18.
Sure. So the reserve for restricted funds is really just programs like Title I, Title II, Title III, Proposition 98, which is like an energy funding that we're receiving. And so without those funds fully being spent, so these projections are assuming that with flat funding for those programs and then increased costs, that those reserves would then go away.
So the expenses are increasing
and then the revenues are staying flat.
Yeah, gotcha.
Correct. So just a summary and some takeaways. Albany Unified School District is not a winner under the local control funding formula. The state has passed down much of the burden for pension costs to local school districts. The health and welfare benefits continue to rise, and at the end of 2013-14, we have a 18% reserve. However, this is expected to drop to under 4% by 2016-17. So if Measure LL passes, the district is still projected to deficit spend by over $1 million annually. However, if it fails, the district would need to reduce its budget by $2.3 million in order to avoid bankruptcy. So some actions that the school district has taken this far is some budget enhancements that total $350,000 annually. One of the items was it's more of like a best practice on how to pay for other post-employment benefits, which are our retirees who have retired and we're paying for their benefits. So with this best practice accounting change, we're able to save $250,000 a year.
Could you clarify that a little bit? How does an accounting change actually come out to be real money and not just hide it somewhere else?
Yes. So what this means is Instead of the district fully paying for the other post-employment benefits, which are about $800,000 a year, instead of paying for it directly out of the unrestricted general fund, we're able to charge 3% of payroll across all the funds, which is a best practice in order to basically maintain that the current employees that are funded out of Title I, out of the parcel tax, out of food service, that eventually when they retire, that there is money available to pay for their retirements as well, because in the end, they're all Albany Unified employees.
But isn't that 3% still somewhere in our budget?
It's no, because it's transferred to then pay for the $800,000 a year in benefits.
I'm lost.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm getting fog in between my.
So essentially, there's about 3% of payroll that's diverted from those funds that would have then paid for either additional books or supplies or contracts, that it's going to then pay for the retirement, the current
So
retirement.
we are cutting some purchases from somewhere else in the budget. We're saying this fund doesn't have as much money as it did, so we're not going to buy textbooks. Instead, it's going into the OPEB.
Correct.
So we're not actually saving the money.
We are saving it in the unrestricted general fund that could then help pay for various things.
All right, well, we're saving it because we're cutting something.
Correct.
Right.
Okay,
Correct.
so it's just distributing the cuts more broadly.
Correct.
But we are actually cutting something.
Yes.
Peter and Paul, right?
Correct. But it's because it's 3% of payroll, it doesn't mean that that there are personnel changes or things that program managers really need to be aware of. It's a small amount that adds up over time and becomes a large amount to save the district.
But it's good accounting, but it's not necessarily good for.
It's not as
Bottom
bad for
line.
students as it would be if we fired a teacher, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Correct.
I get it.
This says annually, for how many years? $250,000 annually for how many years?
Ongoing.
Ongoing. Thanks.
Some other cost savings that have taken place were the review of our current copiers, which are expected to save about $45,000 a year.
Excellent, excellent.
Waste and recycling, which is a program that's working with the City of Albany and stopwaste.org, which is expected to save about $25,000 a year. And then the review of our utilities, which is expected to save about $30,000 a year. Some other items to take note. So there have been some staffing changes that have resulted in an annual savings of $90,000 a year. And that was due to this change in the superintendent, the elimination of a associate superintendent of business, the creation of my position, the chief business official, the elimination of the HR administrator, and then the addition of the director of HR.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out for our audience, this is all coming out of administration, which whenever you start talking about cutting budgets, people are always getting up and saying, well, cut administration. Well, we're cutting administration. So
Yes.
and we're pretty bare bones in administration, right?
There is one budget item proposal. So for 2014-15, I'm recommending that we reduce the what's called the restricted routine maintenance budget by $300,000. Now, it's a sizable amount. However, it won't result in any staff layoffs or reductions in their current operations.
So what will the impact be? What will change?
Actually, nothing, because last year, restricted routine maintenance operated by spending $500,000 a year, and even with the reduction of $300,000 that I'm proposing, they would have $700,000 to operate with this year, which means they'll have a $200,000 increase that can help pay for various projects throughout the district.
Okay, but what'll happen next year?
So next year, because this is a one-time only, so in 2008-9, the state allowed a temporary flexibility in a 3% contribution that was required for maintenance. And so that ends at the end of this year. And so for 2015-16, and this is already incorporated in the budget, the maintenance budget would increase to $1.2 million, which could then be used to pay for even more projects that are needed throughout the district.
So to be clear, that we won't be cutting back on cleaning schools?
Correct.
But we might be deferring something that we will still do, but maybe a year later.
Correct.
If I just want to make sure I understand this. We had budgeted, what did we budget last year for the same thing?
Last year, we budgeted about $500,000.
We budgeted $500,000, spent $500,000. This year we had budgeted $1 million, but you've reduced that now to $700,000, which you're predicting will be enough because we'd only spent $500,000 last year.
Correct. And so we're still able to do additional projects and things like that throughout the district.
But were there particular reasons for doubling that budget item?
One of the main reasons that it was incorporated with $1 million this year was just so there wasn't a large dramatic increase from $500,000 to the $1.2 million required for maintenance in 2015-16.
Oh, that's a state
So
requirement?
it was kind of
Where's that requirement coming from?
Oh, that's coming from the state.
That we have to spend more on our maintenance?
We
Correct.
have to budget more. We don't have to
Budget.
We
spend
have to
more.
budget more on for our maintenance.
Giving us less money.
That's
Gotcha.
that 3% you're talking about?
Correct.
Got it.
Okay,
It's-
thank you.
I admire your job and the job you're doing. It would make me nuts.
So just
I
some
agree.
next steps. September 23rd, we have a budget priorities discussion. November 4th is the general election with Measure LL, the parcel tax. And then on December 9th, I'll bring forward to the board the first interim budget that will either include or not include Measure LL. In mid-January, we'll have the governor's proposal for 2015-16, and we'll then provide that update to the board on January 27th.
Well, I have some questions on item 1, the budget priorities discussion. That's strictly a discussion. That's not any action items. We're just going to discuss what we're facing. And how will we involve stakeholders, including students, parents, teachers, taxpayers? How will they be involved in that discussion? And I'm concerned about what data is going to be provided for us to have this discussion.
Why don't I let you answer, and then I'll share what I had shared with all of you with regard to the history. Go ahead and. If you
Yeah, I know the history, but go ahead, yeah.
The current assumption for the budget priorities discussion would be that it would be a discussion where staff would provide various data based on board direction on any key data that you would like to have in order to just get a better understanding about the particulars within the budget, as well as various cost estimates for various programs and things like that. And then we can include and incorporate the greater staff with this budget, with this board meeting, and where everyone's welcome to attend.
Can I ask how much time we're budgeting for that? So, sorry to use the word budget. How much time are we allocating for that?
I don't think we had set an amount of time yet. Did we have try to remember our last?
We didn't set a specific amount. I would suggest that when you're looking at a work study that has to do with budget, that you allocate at least 60 minutes to this. That's at least an hour that we allocate. And if the board would like us to prepare any additional information or budgetary items, or program items, then, if you give us some direction, we can make sure that we have it prepared for the board meeting.
But do you need that direction tonight if we're going to do this budget priorities?
I have some direction.
Okay.
Pat, it sounds like Pat has something that will help
Well,
us
yeah, let's listen
get
to
through this.
Pat. Go ahead.
Okay, so Mr. Gard indicated that we should begin as a board to give you some basic direction as to how we want to address budget priorities. And so unfortunately, the board members have had quite a bit of experience with this in the past. And I have kept all the documents from the past about budget priority discussions that we have had with various stakeholders. We had a budget meeting at the high school when we were very, very concerned we'd have to make some major cuts. And so I have a frame for it that the board can talk about and can think about, and I'm going to give you all the copies of all the documents that I have, which include how the staff presented the potential costs and cuts, and then how both the staff recommended and individual board members prioritized, gave their priorities and gave discussion and got feedback on these. So the first thing is that we will have to realistically communicate to everyone, to the stakeholders, what would happen if LL doesn't pass. You've already done that, but we could break it down by particular tiers of priorities, particular things that might be cut right away, and we could have discussions about that. However, we've had I think it's very important. It's not just a scare tactic, it's very realistic, and it will be very educational for people with the parcel tax coming up. However, we have had, on the one hand, we've had so many discussions like this. However, many parents are new to it, right? So it may be new to them. However, I do think we need to also there should be a slight discussion as we build the priority list about hope. Because we've had so many discussions like this. So it's like, we have a wonderful community which raises funds and which wants certain things. So we should make clear what's on soft money, what's out of the general fund, what if we had more fundraising, more money from the state in our dreams or whatever, what things we would want to reinstate. I remember years ago I thought, it's going to be so great when my son gets to 9th grade and they have those really small classes in English so they can really learn. Those disappeared and never came back. But so there's certain things that disappeared and never reappeared, which the community might be interested in, and they're listed here. In addition, I think we need to make explicit how we now are going to recognize what the community prioritizes. In the past, we've used funding surveys from the site councils and from school care to sort of direct us, and also we got stakeholder feedback from people at meetings. But now, with local control funding, we have the LCAP, which mandates that we spend, a certain amount of money in certain ways for certain populations, and that needs to be folded in as well. So I think that's part of the community priority, not only to get feedback, but to help people understand that we have these particular sources of data, including their feedback that we're getting, and we need to build that in our priorities. So I'm going to give you this big, long list with all my scribbles, and you're most welcome to ask me questions.
And I would agree that if we really...
I think, let me recognize Paul, because he had his hand up.
And then could I finish my question?
Of course.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you a lot for that, Pat. That's great. I'm glad you kept track of all those things. As I recall, we had input from all the schools and all the departments, but I don't recall ever getting a priority list from our unions. And if we're considering cuts, most of our budget is personnel. Certainly, we would want to know what our union's priorities are, and how, if they have suggestions on how to deal with budget restrictions. I see we have at least a couple of reps here tonight if they want to come up and say whether they want to come to the meeting with specific suggestions or how they want to handle that. I'd love to hear from them. But one way or another, I'd certainly want to hear what their suggestions are, because it's all one community and we want everybody to help in the solution.
And the union members may want to review some of the documents that I have. I could also make you copies because they outline in specific ways, for example, some of the English language learner cuts, teacher cuts that we're going to have. They outline the specific programs that were going to be targeted, and there was discussion about why or why not. So it might be helpful for you to see some of those.
And actually, if you would like, because of the documents that you've provided, we can, for the work study, incorporate these documents into the board packet, so it would be a public document for not just our associations to look at, but for any group or our stakeholders to be able to look at.
Typically, we only get the board packet, a week before the meeting, or less than a week before the meeting, a few days. So if our union reps could get that information quite a bit earlier, that would be helpful.
So I think Alan wanted to finish a question, and then I do want to open it up too for public comment if anyone wants to comment.
And Ron had something to say.
And Ron has something to say. So go ahead, Alan.
Okay, I still have my original concerns. How are we going to communicate with the stakeholders so that they're prepared for this meeting in 2 weeks? We had a meeting similar to this at the high school maybe
That's right.
2 or 3 years ago. That meeting went on and on and on. It was 2 hours at least, and I don't think the people were satisfied at the end of that meeting. I think we needed a second meeting. We're just exposing the ideas, and people are just getting used to seeing this. So, and I think what Pat said, we need cost data, course requirement data. We have the LCAP to deal with. This is a very complicated, and it's going to be a very complicated discussion.
So if I can address a piece of that, and
Yeah.
thank you for the question. Process is very important, and when we look at a work study session, I don't want the public or the board to think that it's one work study and then you have to make all these cuts. The purpose of a work study is to look at the data, but it's also to talk about process. So, and I absolutely agree that we will need to create a process and involve all of our stakeholders, and I don't think that there will be enough time for everyone to come, nor will there be enough time in a board meeting, one board meeting or work study, to have every concern that's addressed. So one of the purposes of a work study is for the board to talk about process, and to go back to what Member Lowe was saying, if there are, I'll call them blocks of cuts or categories of cuts, that we really clearly articulate a process for that as we cut, when the money comes back, in what order are restorations made. My understanding when I looked at the 1213 report, that there were categories of cuts, but no process, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was not a real concrete process in place that was articulated that said, if the funds were to come back, in what priority order would that be reinstated? So that's part of what the work study is. It might be that this board decides to have a second work study session, and it may not be a back-to-back board meeting. It might be, we want to have another work study session in a month. Let's go out and survey our stakeholders and bring back more information. This is important decisions that the board has to make. And I don't want to, although I'm very cognizant of the fact that we are currently deficit spending, I would rather us go just a little bit slower, more thoughtful, more deliberate, and get
we have a reserve. We do have a reserve we can work with for maybe a year before we really.
So just to let me try to encapsulate that. Ron, I know you want to say something, but I think to pull this together, we have to be really clear what our goal for this next meeting is, essentially.
correct. Yes.
Because, and it can't, I think it would be a mistake to say to union reps, oh, you have a week to pull together your priority list that will determine the spending in the district for the next decade. That, of course, would be absurd. So I don't think we want to give anyone the impression that that's what's going on here. But certainly input, if possible, would be useful. I think really what we're doing is deciding how we're going to proceed, rather than actually proceeding with rankings of things at this next meeting.
Good.
Or does that sound?
Yes.
That sounds great.
May I make a suggestion?
Yes, please.
I would suggest that for the work study session, that we have a couple of focal areas. One is, I think we need to talk about process. And I think staff, we can come up with sort of a loose agenda of what that process would look like. So for example, who are our stakeholders that we want to, okay? How do we want to survey our stakeholders? I mean, these are discussion items in the work study. And then if the board would like to give us a little bit of direction tonight, and I know that there probably will be more coming, what documents would you like us to review or to bring? Because you can look at certain documents and say, we would like stakeholders to have all these documents, and what is that process? And then we can talk as a board about what is the process we're going to look at in terms of how we want to cut. In so much as, and this may be a little bit of a bird walk, and I apologize, you can actually have sort of option A, option B, option C. If Measure LL doesn't pass, we're willing to do this many, I'll say $100,000 cuts, this many blocks. You can do it in blocks.
Willing might not be the.
Right, have to. If Measure LL pass, then we know we only need to cut this much per year. I mean, I know Alan is saying it's $1 million, but you can chunk those $1 million into blocks. What do those blocks look like? So we can come up with, I think we should talk more about process next time, and there's nothing that says that at the work study, after listening to our stakeholders, the board may give direction to bring back additional information if possible. Am I making sense?
Yeah. Would it make sense for the agenda committee to actually include an outline of the discussion so we know where we're going? Because usually we just have an item on the agenda and it says we're going to discuss budget, but it might be useful to have some categories in there so we know what we're.
That makes sense.
So most of what I wanted to say has been said, but, you know, in the long run, I've seen this come and go so many times, both restoring and talking about cuts. And I'm actually more optimistic than because I think when the state, when the people of the state recognize that many districts in this state will be bankrupt way before Albany will be, that there'll be a change. So, you know, I'm still looking for the budget in June to see the actual reality of what happens. Yes, we have to plan, but, you know, I'm hoping that we don't have to cut anything, and that's basically what's happened in the past. As far as restoring things, if we do have to cut, I was part of that meeting when I was still the principal at the high school, which happened maybe in 2005. The community meeting lasted a whole Saturday. Yep. You remember?
I do.
Yeah. Because everybody wants a piece of the pie when all of a sudden the money's coming back, and, you know, and what do we do with it? And it's, you know, everybody had and I mean, it was a good meeting, but it's like everybody, no, we have to do this, we have to do that. It's very difficult.
And I think that because the decisions are going to be difficult, I believe it is staff's responsibility to provide the board and the public with as much information as possible so that you can make an informed decision. And having gone through 5 consecutive years of budget cuts myself in a previous district, we did use a process of having a process of how you're going to cut and to know exactly how that the restoration was going to happen, and to memorialize that, because
That's right.
whether the restoration comes back in a year, and I'm very optimistic also in the sense that as revenues increase across the state, maybe more money will come down from the state. We can't plan for that, and I understand that the governor says we have this rainy day fund, therefore trust the state. That one I'm a little bit more skeptical about,
Yes,
I will
absolutely.
say.
So my point is that I want us to be careful not to frighten the public. Yes, we need Measure LL, definitely. But I think that we have to frame it in a way of worst case scenario, these would be the things that we might have to cut in this order. because I want to maintain some kind of hope that we don't have to cut anything.
We're being fiscally prudent.
Yes, we're being prudent, but we're not saying it's a done deal, we're going to cut this.
Okay, so we're running a little behind, so Paul?
Okay, well, two things. One is, we did do the exercise of deciding what our priorities are for cuts several
Yes.
years ago, and did you include that in your pile?
Yes, I did.
Excellent.
Everybody's individual little list and also recommendations from the staff at the
Okay.
time.
So, great, so
imagine
that's,
it's
you
gonna
know,
change that.
we can look at that and see if that still is a broad outline. But the flip side of that is that we know that we have made cuts, but we know that we have larger class sizes, that we have fewer aides in the classrooms, that we have lost library aides, that there's some less administration in the sites and so forth. It would be very useful to me, anyway, maybe other board members, if we had some details about what we actually have lost. If we're going to consider what we want to restore, we need to know what we've lost before we know what we're restoring. So if we've actually lost any program, if, for example, I know that at one time the district was funding the music program, now we're depending pretty much entirely on donations to fund the music program. If we could just go down the list of what the district is not funding, what positions we have lost, what program we've lost, what happened to the class sizes in what grades, that would help me a lot in looking at what I wanted to prioritize for restoration.
And that's why I gave you those lists, because I think it has, for the most part, some of those answers. You know, things that we cut so long ago, almost, that we just never got back. But thank goodness in Albany, it was a smaller list than in many districts, but we still.
Would the board like a list of anything that, if it was restored, what was restored?
Oh, sure.
I don't know if there were, but if there were some things that were restored, or if something was added that was not on the cut. So for example, there's a list of cuts, and certain things weren't restored, but something over here was added. Would you like to know that also?
I think that would be good.
Would that be helpful? I'm not sure, can we do that?
If there is such a thing.
If there is, there may not be, but.
Well,
We know
now-
that there are new programs that weren't there several
New
years
programs,
ago.
but-
Well-
But, you know, let's see what they are, sure.
For example, out of the general, aren't you paying for first through third grade music out of the general fund right now? Right, so, you know, before, almost many of the music programs were on soft monies. So something like that, a different category like that would be very useful for everyone, the community to see as well.
Yeah, some of these things have come and gone. There was a first through third grade music program that then was lost and then was restored. And I mean, I don't know if we need to know the whole history, but certainly we want to know
Oh,
what.
that was before my time. I didn't know that it existed.
So I believe as we have these discussions at the work study, it will probably, I'm more sure of it, will generate more questions and discussions as we uncover, and you may want more data at a later board meeting.
Alan, just 1 second before you go, because we're running 45 minutes or so behind schedule. Maybe not quite that much. I'd like to open it up to the public, and I also want to make sure that we've provided staff with enough of what we would like to see at the next meeting for them to sort of move forward with a plan for a presentation.
Right,
So
and
those are
if I
things
may
we need to
suggest
think about.
that you make clear what you want to see in the minutes, so that Jack, because there's a lot of been going on, so Jackie knows for sure what to put in the minutes.
I also think we should thank Alan. I mean, your presentation was so clear
Yeah.
to the point. I mean, that even I understand all the numbers.
Comment, Alan?
Yeah, just a quick one, and I think it's very important that we communicate clearly and thoroughly with the stakeholders, potential stakeholders, and how are we going to do that?
So you can give us your recommendations at that time, or are you asking for an answer now? I wasn't quite sure, Board Member Maris.
Well, are we going to use emails, e-trees, newspapers?
I think that's part of what needs to be discussed on the 23rd.
Yes,
Right, how we're
I do
going to-
believe that should be, at this point, I think having the board minutes is important. I hesitate to start putting things out on E-Trees and on the website when we have not had a discussion, which, and I go back to Member Rosenbaum's comment, we don't want people to panic. We
That's
don't
a
want.
good point.
So I would say at this point, having the board minutes, the fact that we have our association co-president here, probably, I would say helps an awful lot because she's been through this whole evening.
So you'd prefer not to have a lot of stakeholders at this next meeting?
No, what we can do in terms of advertising the next board meeting, we can put on our district website, and we can send it out through we call it concentric circles, that this next board meeting is going to be a work study, and that we encourage stakeholders to come and listen to what the board, and I'll say the first work study session. I do believe there's probably going to be more.
Well,
And we can,
I'm sorry, who's writing the board summary and highlights for this?
I'm sorry, Ron, it's you.
Okay, because we want to be
Thank
sure
you,
that gets
Ron.
out to all the E-Trees. I'm still not
I
seeing
didn't
any
know
of
that.
those in the E-Trees, so
okay.
we want to make sure that that happens.
Would anybody in the audience does anyone have a comment or would like to speak at this point?
Adams, president of CSEA. And I guess my feeling is that the next meeting needs to be, most of all, informative, because for a lot of people in our community and in our bargaining units, the idea has been that we're going to be doing better. I'm having my first meeting with my people next week, and obviously I'm going to have to, let them know that things aren't looking quite as good as we were hoping they would be. And I think that if you talk to people in the general public, you would also see that there's a fairly strong perception that, things are better, Everything's getting better, we're going to have more money. I think that's the general understanding. And I think it's vital that this information is out there and clear, not just because of Measure LL, but that is an important point, but so that when people are then asked to start thinking about what to do, they have the full picture. I would not be prepared at the next meeting to make any sort of recommendations or discuss any ideas of how to cut or, well, I could probably have some about how to spend more, but
How about just how to include?
it would be difficult. I think for us, it's more just that meeting needs to be informative and as Superintendent was mentioning, process-oriented. And so I just want to throw that out there as my perception of how it needs to be. And I think we don't have enough information. We can't expect people to turn their minds around that fast. This is tough. I think people are going to need a little time to process this.
Mm-hmm. And Susan, I apologize, I didn't see you in the audience when I said that
Oh,
our
no,
association, all of our association presidents, I want to be very involved in this. And I'd say about 3 times a year, school services offers state budget workshops. And I know that traditionally in Albany, it is the CBO and usually the curriculum director and myself who go to these. I really would encourage, and I'd like to invite both our ATA, at least one of our co-presidents, you and our SEIU president, to come to these workshops with us.
That's a good idea.
There are districts that do that. There's a little bit of a cost, but what I like about it is that you hear the same thing from the state of California that we do, and we sit together at the table as a team. And so I really would like to invite you, all of our association presidents, to come to the next school services budget workshop with us if you would like to do so.
Well, let us know about it when it is, and if we're not in the middle of, I don't know, back to school night or whatever, that might be a possibility. Thank you.
Yeah, I particularly appreciate the comment about what the public perception is, because I agree. I mean, what I've been hearing is we've got more, and doesn't appear to be quite that way. Other comments? All right, so I think, are there other things that the board would like to mention now before we move on as things to see at the next meeting, documents that would be helpful? So far we have just some idea of what we've cut, any restorations or additions to program, if any, over the past, say, several years. The documents that we have from a couple of years ago would be interesting to look at, although I don't know if we're going to make too much of them if this is really just a planning meeting. And then beyond that, the goal will be to identify stakeholders, think about how to reach out to them, how to gather information from stakeholders, any further information if we decide that we need more information to request at that time, develop options depending on the funding possibilities, and that it should be basically a process-oriented, informative meeting. Does that cover it?
I think it does. I would add, as I'm sure that, and I'm sure the superintendent and the staff will realize this, that you know, a good part of the work of the outreach to many stakeholders exists already in our district. We have many, we have school care surveys, we have site council surveys, we have, you know, a lot of information about, and now we have the LCAP, and Director Parenti has, you know, facilitated stakeholder groups with that. So I encourage you to ask us to revisit those and not for you to have to necessarily completely reinvent the wheel.
And I believe that there are 3 other pieces that the board asked for: the list of programs that may have been restored, the list of programs that were added, and also to look at the process that was used for the original meetings that were for the budget cuts, so that the board can determine if they want to use that same process or wants to amend the process. And then I can bring some ideas about, in terms of restoration, I can bring some models in.
Right.
Did I capture that clearly?
Sounds good.
I reiterated detail there. I appreciate the mention of the LCAP, and I want to remind all of us that at this point now and for the unforeseeable, or for the foreseeable future, the LCAP and the district budget go hand in hand at the same time to the county.
Right, and just for our no acronyms policy.
Local, yes. Our local control accountability plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our budget. Over decades, the budget has always gone to the county after a board approval. This very first year in June, they went hand in hand, and there is a team at the county now that reviews both at the same time for correlations. So while that one document may be fresh and new for us, in 9 months now, we're going to have to submit our documents again. So they're going to reflect next year's budget and next year's local control accountability plan.
Would it be unreasonable to ask for the cost to the district of doing all of this administrative work for the LCAP? I mean, if it's too hard to figure that out because it's spread among the whole staff, but if you have some idea, I would just be curious to know, because when we're doing informing the public of where our money is going, it'd be nice to say, well, not only has the state changed the funding plan, which gives us less money, but they're also requiring all of this administrative work, which is costing us X number of dollars to do.
It's an idea. I mean, if we could know the percentage, for example, Peter, of time, of your full time that you've spent on LCAP.
Yeah,
for
Peter
the
and
year.
Alan and
I
your whole
think-
staff.
Did you do that?
I'll leave it as a budget percentage of my salary plus everybody else who contributed their time. So every time that we would have a meeting at a district office, or every time I went to host a community session at the high school or whatever, all of those times, of course, it's not just my time, but I think a portion, I've got all my calendar last year to look at, and it ramped up significantly starting in January.
Yeah, somehow the state legislators don't seem to understand every time they mandate a new program what it's costing. I'd love to have that number if it's not too hard to do.
And actually, it's a good number to have, because I would like to share that when I meet with our politicians.
Yeah, Please.
Probably make a very strong guesstimate.
Yeah, but.
But yeah, the real facts, that would be, as long as you don't spend too large a percentage of your time calculating.
No, good point. It's a good point.
I've been.
I'll spend the whole day tomorrow just looking back at last year.
I need to move us along. We have still on the agenda tonight a number of board policies, and before we plunge into them, I want to get a sense of whether this will take the full 30 minutes we have budgeted, because that'll push us a little over, or if people are feeling fairly comfortable. Are there a lot of questions? I know members have emailed staff with questions and had responses. If you're comfortable, or if there are things that, I just want to get a sense of how much you want to talk about here tonight, how long it might take.
I have 3 issues, 3 minutes.
Okay.
I have a few issues, but they're not major. I don't think they will be contentious, so
Okay.
just a couple of minutes.
So we can plunge into this and probably get through them as discussion items for the first reading tonight. Okay, let's do it.
All right.
Sorry, I got to wake my computer back up. But the first is on page, thanks, it's on page 126 for the actual first board policy,
0200.
which is 0200. So does anyone have a question or comment about that
What
board
page am I on?
policy? 126.
126 is,
And that's board policy 0460?
0200.
0200.
no.
No? Okay, let me just, hang on, I'll tell you. Maybe on what's on my computer and what's on, the first one that I have in the packet is page 126 of the board packet. It's board policy 0200. This is the goals for, philosophy, goals, objectives, and comprehensive plans.
No, I had nothing on that.
Me neither.
Nope. No question.
Oh, no questions. is
Oh,
what
no
you're saying.
questions. I thought
You
you
thought they
couldn't-
were saying, no, that's not right.
I'm sorry, I thought
That's
you
not
said you couldn't
there."
find it. Okay,
Yes, it is.
thank you.
We're fine.
You're fine,
Everyone's
thank you.
fine on that one.
Okay.
I have a general question about the presentation of these. I wanted to ask board members if we would be comfortable receiving them only as in a single version, as track changes, for example,
Yeah, I think
rather
actually,
than
we-
multiple versions.
That's all
I think we actually said that once before, that we didn't need the draft version, just the track changes, or new. That's fine with me.
Because it seems we have the one on 126 is track changes, then we have on 132 the same thing again with the changes incorporated,
Right.
although it's marked, I think, track changes there as well. And it just gets a little confusing. If we just had one version with track changes, we could see the additions and the.
Would it help the trustees for the first reading that we would have the track changes, and then for the second reading for the consent, we would have it cleaned up?
Cleaned
Yeah.
up.
Okay, we can do
That's a great
that.
idea.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Please.
All right, so let's jump ahead then to the second one, which is 0460.
No, there was 0410.
But the policy itself is
Yeah, no problem with the
No
policy,
problem,
just
okay.
a typo.
good. So then that takes us to 0460.
Yeah, I had something on that. It's
And
more of a comment than a question.
Right, this is all our new L.
Right.
Very tight. Is this mandated? Is this, are those
Yeah,
dates?
that's the law.
Yeah, I can clarify a little bit
Okay.
here. I reread this paragraph 2 or 3 times trying to do a dot change. I remember a slideshow presentation on this. The board is in session usually in the third or fourth week of August, correct?
Right, we have
Correct.
one
Okay.
meeting in August.
So thankfully, we don't have to work with this year because the county superintendent did not send us a written request for clarification on the contents. We had some clarifications from their CBO and their curriculum side, and I made those clarifications very simple. My response back to them was, thank you. I'll bring this up in our annual update. I didn't want to lead out by making changes to the LCAP that I didn't get input on. And that was enough for them. They didn't come back and say that you needed to bring that to the board. They just said, thank you, and eventually, and then they sent us a letter, said everything is passed. But as I do the math here, so 15 plus the next 15 days brings us to the end of August, plus the next 15 days brings us to the middle of September, plus the next 15 days brings us to the end of
Right, but
September.
15 days is maximum. It could be one day.
Could be. Oh, that's right. If the superintendent of the county responds back in one day, then you're back into, yeah, you're going quick. Yeah, it tangles us up a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, that was it.
If there is change to the legislation, of course, I'll update you, and I'll also bring it to their attention the next time that they provide training. I think they're catching up as fast as we are.
Yes.
And so I've got that on my radar.
Okay.
But my goal is to never get there. My hope is that from their perspective, our LCAP is nice and clean,
Yeah, we can-
and I'm
right.
getting it cleaner to become a metrics-based system, so.
Okay, and Alan?
Page 137, in the third paragraph, notification shall, this is under Local Control Accountability Plan, LCAP. The notification shall be provided using the most efficient method of notification possible, which may not necessarily include producing printed notices or sending notices by mail. I'm a little concerned that that may provide some transparency and communication problems for people who are not on the electronic internet. And it says not necessarily, but I think we really need to focus on getting the information out there and not causing some blind spots for the public. And it looks as though it's an attempt to save paper, right? But do you know why this?
I would suspect, well, first of all, when they say that, it says that, you may, to me, that's very permissive language. We don't have to adhere to the may. We can say we choose to send our correspondence out in a variety of modalities. And in Albany, we do tend to send things out both electronically, we have it in paper, we have it out on e-trees. I would suspect this is probably for districts that are going completely paperless. We recognize that we do have families that can't.
It's just an observation.
Yeah.
Hopefully we don't run into problems with transparency and communication.
Change the language then?
We could.
Suggesting that?
It says may, so it's not
May leaves
restricting
it
us.
open.
Right.
I just, out of curiosity, do we have any idea what percentage of our families are not signed up for the e-trees?
I don't have that information.
Now, we've asked for that in past years. It might be very hard to come by if it's hard to get that information. But it would be good to know because I suspect it's fewer every year, and there might come a time when it's, any written communication could be entirely targeted to the few families who are not on the e-tree.
It was reported to us. It was part of the previous superintendent's evaluation. There was a metric in which she put down the number, the percentage of families that had signed up for. I can go back and find it, but we have that information.
Yeah,
and it got higher.
But it's not necessarily relevant because this has to do with the public and not.
Oh, that's true. It's the families. It was the
That's
families.
only the family.
You're right.
We want the entire public,
That's
There
right, the
are
entire
a lot of
community.
folks that-
Taxpayers in particular.
You're right, absolutely. But in that case, I don't know if any of our communication methods get to the entire community. We don't leaflet the entire community,
No,
just
we've got to make
just
an
our
excellent
families.
effort, I think.
So it's good
Okay.
that this is permissive, so we can strategize at the time about the best way to reach
Right,
people. I
right.
think we can do what we need. Other comments on this one?
No, I have one for the AR, though.
Okay, let's move to the AR.
Okay, on page 142, again, there's no answer to this. Student achievement is measured by all of the following. As applicable, it says academic performance index. With the change in our standardized testing at the moment, I don't think we have an actual definition for academic performance index. So that's something that's going to have to come, I believe.
That's correct.
Yeah, I'm particularly concerned about that with kind of non-academic programs that we have as well and reporting.
So academic performance index has been frozen. We have 3-year averages for our school sites until the state develops a new one. We project that possibly 2016. We might have a new definition, and it'll come after, I would hope, at least 2 administrations of the Smarter Balanced Assessments, not just the first. So the first would be a baseline, but that's open to being developed at the state level. In relation to other metrics that we can use to measure our success, that's definitely the purpose of the LCAP, and that's the structure that we've built in to all of the various goals. They're not all strict academic goals.
Good, thanks.
All right, anything further? We move on to Board Policy 2210, Administrative Direction regarding Board Policy.
I have nothing. Nope, nothing on that one.
Well, I have an issue on page 152, is that, let's see,
Let me
where am
see,
I here?
That's the next one.
the
The next one? Okay.
Oh, no, it's not. Is it?
152. Yes, it is.
Yes,
Yes,
it
it
is.
is.
That's the
That's
board bylaw.
Board bylaws.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, yeah, so the administrative one, everyone's fine with. So let's
Mm-hmm.
look at the bylaws. This is BB 9322 on minutes and recordings. 9324, minutes and recordings.
Right.
Go ahead, Alan.
So I'm a little concerned that our minutes are being restricted somewhat. I think if a board member makes a significant statement, and we do actually include board members' comments at the end of the meeting by name, but if there is an issue brought up by a board member, I think for the public, it would be valuable to know who made that comment.
Oh, where is the exact paragraph you're referring
Page
to?
152.
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting, it's almost like a philosophical statement because it recognizes the fact that we hold power as a body, not as
Yeah,
individuals.
that's true too.
And so what has to be memorialized is what we decide upon as a group. So there have been discussions before about recognizing if there's a vote, for example, recognizing a minority opinion.
Minority.
A minority opinion, it's a philosophical.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe, as you brought up, Pat, that the board handbook actually specifies that minority opinions should be in the minutes.
That's right, part of our
And so they
Should be
should,
what? I missed that.
minority opinions should be in the minutes.
Yeah.
And I don't think the board handbook specifies that the name be attached to that, but we do have, in fact, in the, our version of Rules of Order, that you can make a motion to reverse a decision, right, to bring back an issue. And the person who voted against the issue in the minority is not allowed to be one person who does that. So the minutes should record who voted against an item, so that we can know for sure.
Well, they do, it
But
does
they do.
record the vote. The vote is required to be recorded
required.
by
Vote is
member name.
required to be
By name,
Yes.
by roll call.
But I think it would be useful, since we are required to put minority opinions in the minutes, we could, I don't know if you want to attach a name to that or not, but that's.
I can
a
see that, but I
question.
think I tend in the other direction. I feel like when we campaign, for instance, when we're speaking to the public as individuals, we are individuals. But when we meet as a body, I think we all say what we want to say, but in the end, we reach a unified decision. And I think that's what the minutes should memorialize, is the decision reached, the vote that was taken, vote by name, but who said what exactly? I mean, besides it being too much of a burden for any clerk to deal with, I think, I just don't think that it's the place of the minutes.
There was a time, many boards ago, when I first was on the board, actually, that the clerk tried to do that. It was a mess.
No, I'm sure that is too much. But I would like to see, because we actually very rarely have a vote with a minority decision.
But to continue my thought, the board actually discussed that and it's decided, no, that's not a reasonable thing to have. We are just one board.
May I make a suggestion?
Of course.
I think whenever you have a policy or a bylaw, there are always going to be, every now and then, rarely, an exception to that rule. Sure. Would the board consider that if that exception comes up, that the board president could say, I think this is something where we need to track a person making a comment, or if it's a minority and the person says, I would like for the record to reflect that it is I who made this,
Yes.
then the board can make that decision. So, because I do believe that sometimes there are exceptions to the rule, and I think the board should have some flexibility to do that, and then Ms. Matabusan could put the name in there. Would that be helpful to the board?
Yes, I would definitely agree with that, that either the individual who made the comment or the president could request that be noted in the minutes.
And then it's memorialized in the minutes.
Right.
I think it's fine as long as that isn't abused. I mean,
Yeah.
and so.
True with all of
It would be rare.
Yeah.
I would hope that, you know, the board member who makes that suggestion is doing it to memorialize it for the good of the public.
Yes.
Yes.
To actually understand this particular very important point that they made.
Yeah, I would agree. If we want to do that, we need to modify the wording a little, because currently it says shall not include the names of board members who made specific points.
We could change it to may not include, and that would take care of it.
Or,
I actually don't think you have to change the language.
really?
I don't think so. I think that you could say that the board will not, but again, I think that in those extreme circumstances, and then I agree with Member Lowe, it would have to be an extreme circumstance. You'd say, we understand clearly that this is what the board bylaw says. We believe as a board that this is an extreme circumstance. And I think if you leave the language as is, it would mitigate your concern, which is there a possibility that someone would start to overuse it? I don't think anybody on the board would abuse it.
Well, it's true, this is a board bylaw and not a board regulation, so.
It's a bylaw, it's not a policy.
Right. Okay, is everyone comfortable then with leaving it as is with that understanding?
Yeah,
With that understanding, yes.
yeah, and I had something for the next page, which is the minutes shall reflect the names of those individuals who comment during the meeting's public comment period, as well as the topics they address. And our superintendent had a suggestion that there be a speaker's slip people fill out.
That's a good idea.
I do, and I this is a practice that many districts use, and this is it's a blown-up copy. We can actually do this where we make it to like a speaker card, and this allows for a person to check off the agenda item number if they're speaking on matters of an agenda item, if there's a comment by a non-agenda item, and it has their name, their address, and phone, and the topic of issue. This helps Jackie with the spelling of speakers' names, but also in case, if for some reason we have a question about what was captured, it allows us to have a phone and an address, and then you'd know if it's an Albany resident or a non-resident. So I have copies if the trustees would like to take a look at
Both the
that.
Berkeley and the Albany City Council do this as well.
Yeah, I think it's a
The
great idea.
districts that I've been in the past, you know, that's part of the agenda, right up on top. We'll ask, and it gets announced at the beginning, and you have a stack of the cards at the back
So
of
we'll
the
have
room.
speaker cards, and this will be much smaller. It'll be,
Yeah.
we'll put it in 2-point font or
You
something.
can print it on a card.
It'll be printed on the card.
Yeah, excellent.
What's the purpose of the phone number request?
Ms.
Clarification.
Medusa, maybe you can help me with this. I actually charged her with looking at several templates, either from CSB or from other districts.
I believe the phone number would be to call and verify spelling in case the penmanship isn't legible. We can remove that if you prefer.
No, I think it's a good idea. It's just in case you can't read it, which would probably not be all that rare.
Absolutely.
And we could put please print legibly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bad email address if we
And board meeting date might be pre-filled rather than, or maybe not, asking people to remember the date. Or look at the top of the agenda, I suppose. All right.
Yeah, or maybe we could just get a date stamp and Jackie can just stamp them for the meeting.
So when we
I think
actually,
we're micromanaging.
yeah,
Yeah, you're right, Pat. That's not our business.
Staff will work on that.
Can figure it
Yes,
out.
that's true, yeah.
so that, we're assuming then when we pass this at the next board meeting, then this goes into effect, so, correct?
Or
My suggestion would be that when the board can ask staff now, if you'd like to attach this to the second reading of the board bylaws and policies, and then it would, when you approve the consent calendar, or the consent, it will go into effect. So would you like to give me that direction?
Yes.
Okay.
all right.
Yeah.
Pat, do you have a
I'm fine with that.
fine with that?
Good.
Okay, I'm fine with it as well. I like the suggestion of making a small card. It may not need to have all this text on it, especially if this isn't from our
Yeah.
district, so. it
Well,
wouldn't-
we can leave that to the
yeah,
superintendent.
I bet they can figure that out. All right, let's move us along then.
Okay, so I had something else on that
Okay.
same page, and I think Alan had the same question. when it talks about recording or broadcasting of
Right.
meetings, first we have, the board president shall announce that a recording or broadcasting is being made. Why don't we just put that on the agenda? And maybe it's already there, but if it's not, just in the boilerplate that's printed in the front of the agenda, just say the meeting is being recorded, and the board president doesn't have to remember to say that every
That's
time.
good.
And then in the next paragraph where it says any district recording may be erased or destroyed, I would just want to delete that sentence. I think we should keep our recordings forever.
Good. That was my comment, too.
We can remove that language.
We do, city keeps it.
And I'm concerned that it says may be instead of shall be recorded.
Well, sometimes we've had meetings that weren't recorded because
Venue.
just of a physical issue. Recording wasn't working, or we were in a room that didn't have recording. So we should always have an audio recording.
Yes.
We can always do that because you can
Yeah.
just record it on your computer. But
But it should be recorded so we can verify minutes or whatever.
yeah,
So are we proposing to change shall be to shall be recorded? Shall we leave it as may be?
I would like to see shall be, and then if we have some extenuating circumstances, then,
Right, we can decide at that time.
Yeah.
I'm happy to change it to shall be, especially if we don't specify video recording, just recording.
yeah, and then take out that sentence about may be erased because
Right.
we don't want to.
There's no need to have that. It still may be erased according to state law probably, or,
Right, but
we don't need
I
to
don't want
say,
that
because
in
we're
our
not
policy.
gonna,
Right.
we don't
And with-
erase them, we
and
keep
with our
them.
current digital
Yeah.
recordings, it's not a matter of taking up space particularly, is it? That it's going to
Well,
take a,
over time.
okay.
Okay.
All right, anything else on that? Does any member of the public wish to comment on any of the board policies or administrative regulations we've just reviewed?
Any member of the public still awake after that discussion?
Students?
All right. Good. We have a number of action items. I don't think we'll get through them in 10 minutes. I'd like to ask that we extend the board meeting 15 minutes.
Let's see,
Do I have a
we
motion?
are in 10.
So we have the unaudited
You're
budget.
always the optimist.
We have the unaudited budget as well.
Unaudited actuals.
Yeah.
Well, that won't take a
There's
minute.
not a whole lot, well, let's see how that goes.
I'm okay with 15 minutes, and then if we surprise each other by finishing early, that will be great. Let's just go, let's just go.
Shall
Let's
we
go.
ask
Let's go.
Alan how long
Let's
it
not
thinks
talk
it'll
about it.
take
Let's
to
go.
get
Let's
through?
do it, yeah,
Okay.
let's go.
What do
So-
we end up with?
We're going to extend to 9:45.
Correct.
We are
Okay.
moving to unaudited actuals.
So I just want to make a comment about the unaudited actuals. Because of the presentation earlier, most of
it's true.
most of your, what do we call it, your narrative has been covered already. So
That's correct.
I don't,
Yeah, some of
I don't
these
have
pie
a need
charts
to
are-
hear it, unless it's something that you really need to.
Actually, if I may make a suggestion there, when we have our discussion at the next meeting about where we stand, some of these pie charts will be
Pie charts are great.
very useful. And maybe we don't have to go over them in detail tonight, but we can look at them next time.
It's so clear.
Yeah.
I just have one comment, a question on page 173. 170, Fund 35, county school facilities, that 3.1 million is available from our current projects like St. Gabriel and,
Well, currently the board hasn't formally given direction on how to
No, but
utilize those funds.
we could give direction that would be spent.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So just to be clear, the unaudited actuals are the numbers that have come in, essentially the final numbers, but not yet audited, on last year's budget. So we're looking at last year.
Correct.
And we're approving at this time because that is a state requirement that we approve unaudited actuals before they receive an audit.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe we could just have Alan give us the, the bottom line.
Bottom line.
This year's, the unaudited actual versus the projected budget, where, did we come out ahead, behind? Just very briefly.
So the unaudited actuals, staff is recommending the acceptance of the 2013-14 unaudited actuals financial report. And in January is when staff would present to the board a final audited version of the 2013-14 fiscal year. So as comparing the unaudited actuals versus the estimated actuals, which were in June, there was a slight increase. However, a majority of that increase was due to carryover funds related to the technology department, which then is using those funds this year for purchasing more Chromebooks throughout the district to help better prepare the district for the online testing.
When you say increase, you mean we spent less or we spent more?
We spent less money than what was projected in June, but a majority of that
surplus will be
a majority of the surplus
will be taken.
has been accounted for due to the technology department as well as the Albany Aquatic Center. So the Albany Aquatic Center is carrying over about $260,000 into 2014-15 because of an accumulated surplus.
Right, and just to be clear for the public, we have enterprise programs like the cafeteria fund, which if it runs a surplus, that cannot be swept into the general fund.
Correct.
But the aquatic center is not an enterprise program, and those funds could be swept into the general fund if we needed that money.
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct.
So we're very impressed.
Just to make clear,
Aquatic Center.
what we show here in the unaudited is the loss of measure LL in 2015.
It is the loss of measure I, which is the current parcel tax,
Okay,
which
right.
ends
Right.
this year. Yes.
Do we have?
All right. Any other questions? Any comments or questions from the public on the unaudited actuals? Do I have a motion?
I'll move that we accept the unaudited actuals.
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 So we've accepted your unaudited actuals. Thank you very much, Alan, for bringing them.
And thanks for all the work to
and-
prepare them. I know it's a tremendous amount of work.
And thanks for making it understandable.
I do my best.
Item B is to approve a contract for architectural services with WLC Architects for Marin Elementary for Phase 2 seismic mitigation. And I believe we can describe these together, B and C, and D, actually, because it's the seismic hazard geological survey, the geotechnical engineers.
Give a page number where it starts so I can jump to it.
375.
So,
375?
I think so.
yeah.
Page 352 is the beginning of the Phase 2 seismic mitigation contract with WLC for Marin Elementary. And I just want to remind the board, so in March 11, 2014, the board approved a contract with WLC Architects for the architectural services for the rebuilding of Marin Elementary. And at the August 26th board meeting, the board gave direction to pursue as much state funding as possible for Marin and Ocean View Elementary. And so these three contracts that I'm presenting to the board today are in line with that direction.
So I had just a general question. You've already answered it in writing, but for the public. We're going with WLC. This isn't a big enough contract that we're required to put it out for competitive bids.
Correct.
But WLC has been working on this for quite a while. We saw some detailed diagrams from them in the past, engineering drawings about what the seismic deficiencies were in these buildings. And so they have quite a bit of knowledge. So it's your understanding and expectation that if we went out for competitive bids, nobody could even come close, because WLC has already done a lot of this work.
That is correct.
We're looking for the financial impact for both sets of plans identical.
Correct.
And the reason we have to do this is that the state requires us to estimate the cost of seismically reinforcing buildings, even if we don't plan to seismically reinforce them, but to replace them.
Yes.
Yeah, it's more than an estimate, right? It's an actual
plan.
It's an actual design, and then
Right.
the Division of State Architects reviews those designs to then try to plug a number on how much it would cost to repair the buildings. And so the state then uses that figure to allocate funds for seismic mitigation funding. All right.
Well, how have we confirmed the 30, or the 43.5, which falls below the $45,000 limit, is sufficient to do the work? They've given us some work description in a matter of percentages, like 30% for schematic design, design development 25%. Do we have a good sense of whether or not that's going to produce the product that the state architects?
Well, one of the things specific with the WLC contracts for Marin and Ocean View are that these are not to exceed contracts, and the main purpose is to provide sufficient architectural drawings in order to apply for the seismic mitigation money. And so if the $43,500 that they've proposed is not sufficient, they don't have any recourse to try to increase the payment for this
They
service.
still have to produce a product at that price.
That is
Okay,
correct.
Great. Well, and then
Go ahead, Alan.
I wanted to finish. So we're doing, well, it's not this contract, excuse me, it's the next one. Go ahead.
Well, we're discussing all three together.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, so feel free, the geotechnical, the architect, and the two
all
architectural.
right. So I'm concerned we're doing the geotechnical for, and seismic for Marin, but not for Ocean View, which is in line to apply for the same funding.
That is correct. And so the reason that I'm bringing forward the geotechnical survey for Marin and not Ocean View yet is because since Marin is so much farther along in the architectural drawings to rebuild the campus, they need this survey completed in order to complete those drawings and be able to deliver to be able to submit the drawings to the Division of State Architect by December.
So does that mean Ocean View won't be in line as well as Marin is for the funding? In terms of time?
And in terms of time, because there hasn't been a contract approved for the complete architectural drawings for Ocean View, Marin would be in line sooner. And if it's the board direction to bring a contract, well, we're currently, we have currently issued a request for qualifications for architectural services for Ocean View Elementary, and that was based on board direction from August 26th that pursue as much state funding as possible to repair those two buildings. And so once the request for qualifications response closes and staff reviews those proposals, then we'll bring a contract to the board.
So will Ocean View be in a weaker position to get money than Marin is because of the timing?
Well, I have met with the state regarding seismic mitigation funding and all funding that is available for facility use. And basically, there is money still available. However, the clock is ticking. You know, with the recent earthquake that occurred in Napa, there's several school buildings in Napa Valley that are now eligible for it. And so they've mentioned that, you know, Napa Valley as well as Long Beach Unified, which is a much larger school district, are also very much pursuing seismic mitigation funding. And so the sooner we can get some of these architectural drawings completed and submitted to the state, then the sooner we can be in line and the greater possibility of actually receiving some funding.
So with Ocean View, do you have a sense of when we might be in line?
Well, we began Marin in March, and we expect to have it completed by December. And so if we begin Ocean View in about October timeframe, I'm assuming by June, July, we'd be able to have something to the state.
Thank you.
Okay, I have two minor things. One is, Alan already knows about this, but all three of these contracts have a discrimination paragraph. I'm just asking that the wording in it be changed to conform to our board policy we just approved.
Yes.
0410, which covers a few more categories.
Right.
That's a simple thing. I don't think there's any problem with that. And the other thing is kind of more of an observation. I don't think it's a question really, but the geotechnical plan involves boring holes to evaluate subsurface conditions, and the locations of the holes depend on the position of the buildings of the new proposed structure, according to this contract. Even though this is part of the, I'm not sure about that. If this is actually part of the preparation for the seismic mitigation retrofit, then it seems like it should be in relationship to the present structure.
So this contract is specific to the rebuild of Marin Elementary.
Okay.
And so my understanding is that they would do a survey of the property as it is now, and then incorporate that information with the architectural drawings that are currently being developed. And at a later date, once they would come back and then actually review based on the new buildings.
Okay, because the way the contract is written, the positioning is based on the planned building footprints. Yeah, if access within the planned building footprints is not feasible, we will locate exploration points within a reasonable proximity. It just sounds a little bit tricky since there are buildings on the site now and they're not going to drill through them. There's nothing in the third contract. The first two contracts have a lot of wording, some specific wording about access to the site based on there being students on the site, and the third contract doesn't have that wording. Is this intended to be done when classes are not in session? Is that the idea? It doesn't really say that they need to check in with the office and when they can be there.
It's less involved than the architectural design needs, and so with working with the contractor, I make sure that if they do need to go on site, that it's at times that it won't impact as much the actual instruction of service and school day.
If they're going to bring in a drilling rig, they're certainly going to be on site. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Do I have a motion?
I'll move the 3 contracts, 2 with WLC for Marin and Ocean View, and 1 for geotechnical engineering investigation. Kleinfelder.
I'll second.
All right, so we're voting to approve 3 contracts at once, 2 with WLC, 1 with Kleinfelder. All in favor of approving all 3 contracts, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So that passes unanimously. That's 3 and 1. And we can move on to the final resolution, reduction of classified services, item E.
And this is an item that the board asked us to bring back from the last board meeting. And I do have our Director of Human Resources, Ms. Cynthia Tea here, as well as Sabrina, who is our coordinator of the Alternative Education Program. I got that correct. So if you please come forward. I do know that the board had asked some questions on this regarding about the reduction in force. So I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia to provide some information, and then have Sabrina, and then if the board has any questions regarding this.
All right, so we're asking for the reduction of service due to lack of work. As you remember, the McGregor campus moved from San Gabriel over to the high school, which does reduce some of the traffic, which is part of what the secretary was doing. There are also, how many students? About 35? 30 students at this point. So they're just, she's there to make sure the office is running smoothly. She does attendance, but it really is only about 2 hours of work a day. I want to talk to you a little bit about how the layoffs work. when the board approves a layoff, we have to notice the person who's going to be laid off, and they have a 60-day notice. So if you approve the layoff tonight, the person will stay in their position all the way until November 14th. Now, during that time, things can change. If the enrollment goes up, or we find that there is more work to be done, the layoff can be rescinded. It can also, at a later point, after November 14th, be brought back, because this is lack of work due to the size and the location of the school. If something changes, it's possible that there will be more work again and we would have to reinstate it. Now, when somebody is laid off, after 60 days, they go on what's called the 39-month rehire list, which means that if that position comes back, they are the first person in line to get the position. Does that make sense? So I just wanted to let you know that part. This, so the classification, I should say, the classification that the person who's laid off, if there is another opening with that classification.
So any secretary one?
Correct.
And this is a .2 FTE layoff?
0.25, 2 hours.
So is that person still employed at a lower?
So that person would be, stay employed at 0.75.
If I may add, I want to make this understood by all the trustees. Our desire always is, if we have to do a layoff for lack of work, is to try to make the employee whole, as we call it, as soon as possible if the position were to be reinstated. And I want to reiterate what Ms. Atea said. While there may be lack of work now because there are a certain amount of students at McGregor, should that increase, and I'm kind of making up a number, should the number increase double or 10, 15 more students where it requires more work, then the employee in that position who has been laid off is offered that FTE back. The nice, I hate to say the word nice, the benefit of having a 60-day window is that it allows us another 60 days to see what the work is or what the work is needed. So currently, there's not enough work for the position. But that 60-day window allows us to go into, I believe it's November.
Mid-November.
November, which takes us now into the holidays. It gives us time to reassess, and that employee has rights to that position should that work come back. So it is our desire to make that employee whole.
So I wanted to ask, I'm sorry, I don't remember how to pronounce your last name. Greighton, Ms. Greighton. I understand that you have a multiple series of responsibilities, including your responsibilities for McGregor and your responsibilities for the Flex program and the students, and your responsibilities for also the hospital and other care. So this is a whole a varied population of students who the board really wants to see well supported, and we're glad that you're doing this. So I would like to reiterate that if you need the increased support of the secretarial work at some point, and revisit this. This is something that is very much in our mind, that you have multiple populations that you are supporting, and we want them supported to the best of all of our abilities. So I don't know if at this point you have an opinion yet, or you're just going to be flexible, seeing what your populations are
Yes,
like.
I thank you for saying that, and I thank all of the board for giving us and giving me additional 2 weeks to really assess the need at McGregor. And as you say, I have many hats in my new position, and like you, I took the position because I care about all the students, but in particular our McGregor students who need me really hands-on and need my time to be with them. I have looked at, or have assessed the past 2 weeks, the workload, and I feel that a reduction at this time is appropriate.
All right. Well, just keep in mind that we are aware of
of all the support that you're giving, and we want to give you the resources that you need to be successful with these students.
Thank you. I do feel that. Thank you.
Paul? Yeah, this is just a kind of a general comment. I want to try to word this carefully. You know, I made the motion at the last meeting to table this question because there was a lot of concern on the board. And I think I can speak for the board in saying that we're all very concerned that we not lose any valued employees, and all our employees are valued. But on the other hand, it's very unusual for the board to weigh in on a specific position. It's not really our job to second guess personnel and say, well, you shouldn't let this person go. So just in general, you know, these reduction in force items come up in the agenda all the time, and this is the first time that I remember us actually talking about it at length and tabling the motion and so forth. And I don't want this to have been a precedent that every time personnel feels they need to let someone go or hire somebody or change somebody's job, that the board weigh in on it. You know, I definitely want to be supportive of other board members if they have a concern, but just in general, I don't want that to be a precedent.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I'm always the one mumbling about micromanaging, but I do think in this case, it is really a focus about our concern about the transition of McGregor to its new home and I can't speak for everyone, but my anxiety to make sure that the new home and that the new transition is a good setting for everyone, and that they are supported in the way that they need. But your point is well taken.
Ron, you have a comment?
All said.
Move a school to get it up and running, and I don't know whether this reduction in force will prove to be, continue to be appropriate, but I think that I would like to appreciate the opportunity to revisit it if necessary, and thank you all just for spending so much time on it. I know that this is unprecedented. I too was surprised when it happened.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan.
And hopefully it'll all work out great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, I will move Resolution 2014-15-2.
I'll second.
All in favor of approving the resolution for reduction of classified school services, say aye.
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 Aye. So that's all members voting yes.
And we're past our 9:45.
We are. We have only board the superintendent comments, so if we can go just 3 more minutes till 9:50.
I think probably
more
going to take 5 minutes.
5 more minutes, then.
4 minutes.
I've got 2
Great.
items.
So,
I
board
have
members,
2.
comments.
But how about the superintendent?
I have three, but I can name that tune in about 60 seconds.
Go for it.
You want me to do it? First, I really would like to thank the city of Albany for the work that they're doing at Ocean View in terms of helping with the traffic mitigation. They're working on signage, they're working on putting the bicycle loops in there. Met at the 2x2x2 meeting, and we found out that that land is actually UC Berkeley land. The city is doing this because they're doing it in the best interest of our students. So I want to publicly thank the city of Albany for doing that. The second thing is I really want to thank the Albany Middle School neighborhood parents and neighbors for coming out to yesterday's neighborhood meeting. We got a lot of information about their comments, their concerns, and their ideas about the San Gabriel site. So I want to publicly thank all of our neighbors for coming out. And finally, you know, I've been sending for the last couple of superintendent's updates excerpts from the chapters on leaders of learning. And so we have a copy of Leaders of Learning for each of our board members. I've given you the highlights for chapters 1 and 2. Staff is reading the first 4 chapters, and it is my goal to provide you with highlights at each update so that you can follow along with our administrative staff in the Leaders of Learners, and we will be bringing that to you. We'll get them to you very soon.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Paul?
Okay, 2 items, I'll try to be quick. The school board appoints a member to the City Arts Committee. The member we appointed last year has resigned from the committee. The committee is down to 5 members currently of a 7-member committee, and this last meeting they had Monday night, they couldn't get a quorum. I think it's pretty important that we appoint a new member to that committee, and it would be best if they came with some connection to the schools because they are being appointed by the school board. So I'm going to appeal especially to Pat and John, who have kids in the schools and no other parents. Anybody with an interest in art, they don't have to be an artist, but just an interest in art. And this is a city committee, it's not a school committee, but certainly we would want them to be representing the schools at this committee.
But there should also be a public notice that the board is looking.
Yes.
And I can't remember if we did one recently. So
Maybe it can be included at the end of the highlights, just as a single sentence at the end of your highlights, Ron. It's just the board is looking for, I don't know, if you think that's a good idea. All right, and then Paul, you have
I had one other item, which unfortunately my iPad just died. I hope that it comes back. But in a discussion with the superintendent, she can help me with this since obviously she was there. We were talking about career technical education, and she suggested that I ask for an agenda item for the staff to let the board know, to bring to the board what the enrollment is in our current career-related programs. We have 1 or 2 active small schools at the high school, plus we have some other career-type classes. So what the current enrollment is, and any data that we have on how those students are doing relative to the general population.
Yes, you had asked about whether we could track if the attendance was improved, if the grades improved, and Dr. Brown and I have talked about that. She is going to be doing, I believe later on this fall, a CTE update, and she can attach that information to that.
That's at our next meeting?
Well, that
No,
meeting,
it's-
that presentation is scheduled for the next meeting. I'm not going to have time to collect that data in between all of the other activities I'm doing. I'm also doing an enrollment update, and I'm trying to provide you with 3 to 4 years worth of data in enrollment. So I'd be happy to provide you with that data as far as the career tech ed enrollment and outcomes, but I don't think I can get it done in 2 weeks.
I'm thinking maybe sometime in late October or early November that we can do that kind of an update.
Yeah, fine with that.
Great. So that was an agenda request. I need someone else on the board to back me up to actually get it on the agenda. Thank you. Alan, I'm done.
Go ahead, Alan.
The League of Women Voters is tentatively scheduling candidates for school board forum for the 1st of October in the evening in these chambers. I think Paul got a notice. I don't know if Mr. Stapleton Ross or Stapleton Gray received one. Good, okay.
October 1st?
October 1st,
which
yeah.
is a Wednesday evening, right here.
Okay.
From 7 to 9, was it? 7 to 9.
Yeah, 7 to 9. Also, I attended the same middle school neighbors meeting, and a couple of the key things that came out of that were they suggested that we do a planning process to determine the best location for the community and the school district for district offices, not just necessarily putting them at San Gabriel site, which is already heavily used by school district. And they also wanted to be sure and have a member of the neighborhood be on the design committee, so that they have some input to what happens on their neighborhood. It's not just parents, teachers, school board. Also reiterate that the Albany Triathlon is the 27th. For information, albanytri.com. And we had our first 2x2x2x2 meeting last week, which John and I both missed because of a communications problem, but I look forward to attending the next one. I wondered if the superintendent could give us some idea of what happened in that.
Yes, at the
meeting?
2x2x2 meeting, we again talked about the Ocean View.
For the public, can you say what that?
I'm sorry,
what that
the 2x2x2 meeting is UC Berkeley, the City of Albany, and now, and the school district, and now UC Village has representatives. And so we all met together and we agendized items, and we talked about what the city plans were in terms of capacity and build out with projections up to 2035, the year 2035, and projections on what that might mean for how many students, additional students would be enrolling by 2035, and there's a prediction of about 200 students that would be in addition. We talked about the Ocean View, the work that they're doing to help with safety. I brought up the agenda item about the traffic issue on Spokane, because our neighbors had brought that up about could we block off a little bit of the street for certain periods of time during parent drop-off and pickup so that it improves the safety for the students. So those are some of the items that we did talk about, and it was my error that you folks were not notified. So we've made sure to clear up that error, that all of the meetings that board members are assigned to, you now will be getting notices of when the next meeting is, and then we'll try to see if we can get additional dates out to you so you can agendize them way in advance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ron?
So just briefly, Pat and I also attended the meeting at AMS about the build-out at the McGregor site, and I just wanted to comment that I thought it was just a very rich opportunity, and Superintendent Williams did a really great job in eliciting and listening and making the neighbors who gave me feedback later on feel that they were heard and that they got an opportunity not to speak rather than being spoken to. And Bart as well.
Excellent.
Great. Anything further? All right then, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.